That was sickening last week, by the way.
What? What is going on with you here?
No, it's not. What is this stuff on here? We're Hockey Night in Canada, and we're talking about saving the world and all that stuff. Let's talk hockey.
Well, that's the whole idea behind December the 25th.
Let's talk about some good guys.
Okay.
Let's talk about the troops.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, we're discussing the song Dear Coach's Corner, which is track number 4 on 2009's supporting cast.
I am so excited to be doing another supporting cast track. I think about that episode number 40 with Wob all the time.
Oh, man.
And I'm like so happy as well that people really liked our This Is Your Life episode, which we did a few episodes back. So like I'm stoked about this. But you know, Dear Coach's Corner is such an iconic song for this band. And this is such an exciting episode. I'm really pumped for this one. But this is a long song, 4 minutes and 42 seconds. It's a long song by Propagandhi standards, one of the longest. And it's also, check this out, their 4th most popular songs on one popular streaming service and the 6th most popular song on another popular streaming service. It is by far their most streamed song online from supporting cast, and it has been streamed almost 3.4 million times on one service where the stats are publicly available. So this is a massive, massive song for this band, and I'm really happy that we're talking about it.
And that actually kind of makes sense, Greg, because if you think of the position of it, you know, it being track number 4, to me, growing up with perhaps more mainstream and accessible music, it always seemed like track 4 was going to be a single.
Yeah.
So this almost feels like a single, even if it wouldn't or couldn't be played on the radio. It definitely has those elements, but
yeah,
you know, it stands out on this album, and supporting cast is just an incredible album, and it's a album of immeasurable impact to so many listeners. I know you, Greg, it's your favorite. For me, it's probably my close to or around, you know, second favorite. But this is our 7th episode, and I think this is a landmark here to talk about Dear Coach's Corner for our 50th episode.
Woo! I'm so excited. Every time we get to like one of these little milestones, it really makes me happy and proud of us, you know? And I'm so happy that people actually care about this. 50 episodes deep, we're talking about Propagandhi for like literally hundreds of hours at this point, which is really crazy. So yeah.
Because about a year ago, Greg and I were kind of thinking like, hey, do you think people are going to listen?
Exactly. Yeah. And we were thinking like, if this doesn't go well, we will just bail. We won't release any episodes. Like we'll record some, we'll test it out, and then I'll put together like an episode 1 and maybe like an introduction episode like we did for episode 1. And then we'll do a song discussion and we'll see how we feel. And if it feels okay, we'll go for it. And so, you know, it was really 50-50 if we were going to actually, you know, gel as discussion partners on the show. So I'm still pretty amazed that we're a year into this project now. I know we didn't do episodes until the summer last year, but this is the time of year last year where we were really hitting the ground hard on this and getting the artwork from Justin and really planning it out, you know?
Yeah. And how many, I don't know, conversations, how many opportunities, all of those things available, how much we've heard from listeners and connected with, you know, fellow fans of the band. I think that's easily been one of the best parts.
You know, and so for the last 3 years or so, I've been living in Buffalo, and I go to shows alone, right? Like I don't have many friends here. And so my social circle here is microscopic. And so now what's really crazy is I feel like when shows start up again, if I was to go on our Instagram or our Twitter and say, hey, everybody, I'm coming up to Toronto to see XYZ band at Lee's Palace or the Opera House or Danforth, that like 20 people would reply, and I would like be able to like walk in to where a group of people were actually expecting me and be like, let's hang out. Yeah. And that makes me so happy because I feel like I've almost I feel like I've gained so many new friendships with people that I would legitimately hang out with and have an absolutely wonderful time. So just for all of you out there listening, like Keith and I love you. We think you're incredible. We're so happy you want to hang out with us. And so before we go into this episode, right, I want to just acknowledge really quick that these episodes get extremely out of hand as far as the length and the depth and everything. Like I committed long ago to not constraining episodes to be a particular length. And I just wanted to see where the story led us, right? If you have tons and tons of vocab and history and great interviews and stuff to say about a song, like why stick to a single format that is totally expected within a confine that we self-impose? Right. So I just want to remind listeners that these things are long. The episodes will never be short. And I like to think that these are sort of like choose your own adventures as well. I always put timestamps in the show notes. So if you go in your podcast app, you will see the exact timestamps where each segment begins and ends. So if you come to listen to our show just for the interviews with the people that we have, you can find those timestamps in the show notes and skip right to that section and not listen to anything else. If you're here for just me and Keith, the last hour conversation that we have at the end where we break down each song from our perspectives, you can skip right to those sections. Or you can listen to the whole thing over the course of a week. It's however you prefer. So I love the fact that we have these long, almost like, I almost consider these like song documentaries, like the documentary of a song. It's like our best effort at creating the most in-depth story that we can tell on every song. And but I realized that that it's super long. So I just want to remind you that those timestamps are in there for you. Right. So before we get into the song as well, I want to talk about the title a little bit. Keith, are you familiar with the segment Coach's Corner growing up in Indiana? Did you know that this exists?
No, I had no reference of who these people were or what this show was until I heard this song for the first time.
Yeah, well, I found an interview with Chris and Beeve from 2009 on the website silver7s.com where Chris describes the title very straightforwardly. So instead of me pontificating and over-describing, I'm just going to quote Chris here. So this is Chris Hanna in 2009. It is a song that is about the Coach's Corner segment between the first and second periods of Hockey Night in Canada. Specifically, it's addressed to Ron MacLean, the idea there being that he would be open to a possible analysis of collusion between professional corporate sports and the geopolitical interests of the prevailing order, whereas Don Cherry has about as much brain as this item here. Chris lifts up a piece of metal he finds nearby. He's just a useless mouthpiece of a system that stinks, the kind of personalities, and hockey is rife with them, that just cozy up to power and forget about marginalized people. I think Ron MacLean represents some of the best things about hockey, and Don Cherry represents some of the worst things. I despise the attempt of the NHL mirroring the NFL in the States to get a captive audience of part of the population to mindlessly nod their heads at military adventurism overseas, especially to a whole nation of children watching on TV. I consider it a form of child abuse.
Yeah.
So that's a direct quote from Chris in 2009. And I just wanted to quote him at length there because I feel like he summed it up so perfectly about his inspiration for writing this song as a pre-parent himself when he wrote the song, but as an uncle, watching his own kiddo watching his own niece and family members ingest these covert messages, and maybe not so covert as well, about what countries are supposed to be and think about. So I was thinking a lot about Cherry's influence on generations of Canadians, boy and girl, young and old. And I got to watching some Cherry clips, and he seems like the kind of guy who would just go off on these tangents constantly when there was an actual game of hockey he could have been commenting on, right? He's a commentator on a specific game that everybody in the country is watching, and he goes off on these random things that have nothing to do with the game that he is being paid to comment on. So here's a sample clip of where Cherry talks about different genders in locker rooms. And just listen to the tone of Ron MacLean's voice in this clip when Cherry says he wants to say something. He goes, I just want to say something. I just want to say something. So this is like a common thing that people who are about to say something horrible, I just want to say something. And they act like they're like some martyrs for truth, right?
Right.
That's like the signal of I'm about to say something horrible and you better like just agree with me so that we can move on, right? So listen to the tone of Ron MacLean's voice in this clip when Cherry says he wants to say something, and then just listen to this. It's an intermission report about a hockey game, allegedly.
Hey, Stanley Cup playoffs start Tuesday, Don.
But I want to say something first of all, okay? Right. I want to say something first of all. My good buddy and a good friend of mine, Duncan Keith, is in a little trouble in Vancouver. And the reason was that he was smarty to a female reporter, and it just said something about you should be a referee or something, and the males, she didn't say anything, but the male reporters went a little nuts and everything like that. Now he's a sexist and all that stuff. I don't believe, and I really believe this, I don't believe women should be in the male dressing room. I know, wait a minute, I remember the first time it happened to me. Guys are walking around naked, and I hear this woman's voice. I turn around, there's a woman. She's asking me about the power play. I said, let's go outside. And she said, I'm not embarrassed. I said, I am.
Well, can we, you were telling me.
What do you say?
Well, I totally think a woman can be in the dressing room.
No.
But I do believe a lot of guys take advantage, and they are sexist. Duncan Keith wasn't even close. He was hot about the fact she was making a call, and he was saying,
wait a minute, you believe women should be...
Of course, Don. Like in any job, equal opportunity.
Well, in equal opportunity, then why aren't men in women's dressing room?
Well, they should be. We'll fix that.
You want them to be in there?
Why not?
Well, listen, Carrie plays hockey, right?
Yes.
And she's a hockey player.
Yes.
So here's another clip of Cherry talking about women at hockey games getting smacked by pucks. So check this one out.
You women are going to get mad at me out there. But I was standing out in the hall here in the first 5 minutes, and it was a tip shot. A guy tried to get it over the blue line, and a guy tipped it, and it went over my head and hit this poor lady in the face. I'm telling you, when you come to the games, keep your eyes on the puck. And I'm telling you, I've seen some awful smacks, and it's always a woman yapping away there.
No,
look at the game.
Lots of fans. What are you talking? Both genders get involved in talking about the game. I agree
I'm
with you.
just trying to help
Look
them.
at the puck, but don't blame women, men, or anybody else for getting in the odd conversation when you pay
Wait a minute.
to get a ticket to come to the Forum. It's an exciting opportunity for a lot of people.
Okay, so these are just a few of the clips that I've found. And if you go on YouTube, you can find countless Don Cherry quotes. All you have to do is Google, like type in like Don Cherry, like bloopers or Don Cherry offensive statements or something like that in YouTube. And countless of these videos will pop up. And he did this spread out over the course of decades. And the reason I'm playing these clips before the interviews on this show is because our first guest on the show is going to have a lot to say about the impact of Don Cherry's thinking on generations of Canadians throughout the last, from the 80s onwards. Right, Greg. So tell us about the two guests for our Coach's Corner episode. So this is a jam-packed episode, dude. We have two discussion guests and two musical guests on this episode. So the first discussion guest is Sheldon Birnie, who is a journalist, hockey player, and music fan in Winnipeg. And the second discussion guest is Scott Radinsky from the band Pulley, and who also is well known to have played Major League Baseball and been a coach himself for many years. So those are the two discussion guests that I'm going to talk to for this episode. And the first musical guest is Tim MacMiller from Protest the Hero. And the second musical guests are Emilie Plamondon and Karl Bullets. So Tim MacMiller obviously is the guitarist in Protest the Hero, and he was our guest on the Status Update episode, and he's become a friend. So Tim, if you're hearing this, hey pal, hope you're doing great. But Tim reached out a while back and said he was working on a cover of Coach's Corner on piano. Tim's been playing a lot of piano lately through the pandemic and the quarantining. And so Tim made he's still working on it. It's not totally done, but Tim's going to be doing a lot of awesome piano projects for his, like a solo thing that he's sort of working on. And so we have like a Tim's version of Coach's Corner on piano, which is really, really great. But the reason I'm talking about Tim's cover in so much depth is because at the start of the Dear Coach's Corner Propagandhi song, we know this quote that Propagandhi put in of Cherry ranting and all this stuff at the very beginning of the song. That's sickening, right? But the new quote that Tim puts on the cover of his song is the comment that got Don Cherry fired in the fall of 2019.
Wow,
10 years after the release of Supporting Cast.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear Tim's cover here in a second. And he puts the quote that Don Cherry said on national television that gets him fired. And I found a great article in Sports Illustrated about the landscape of hockey post Don Cherry in the NHL. And this is a great passage. So here's what it says about a year after Don Cherry got fired. The hockey world that Cherry left a year ago is radically different than the one that exists now. Roughly 3 weeks after Cherry stepped down, Calgary Flames coach Bill Peters was forced to resign after former players detailed Peters' laundry list of verbal and racial abuse that was directed when players were in the minors. That began a seismic conversation about race and inclusion in the game. The global pandemic shut the game down for months, and the day it started again, a player from the Minnesota Wild gave a stirring and powerful speech about racism in the game before taking a knee for the national anthems. Then in August, after watching their league's ham-handed attempts to address the shooting of Jacob Blake and others at the hands of police, players took matters into their own hands and paused for 2 days during the playoffs to protest racial injustice and violence. The Hockey Diversity Alliance was formed, and several players, many of them sons of the quote-unquote you people to whom Cherry referred, felt comfortable speaking out and not sticking to sports. So these guys are working hard to make hockey a safer, more inclusive place, and Cherry's position in the game would have been another obstacle. So what I'm going to do now is play Tim's piano cover, and then we'll be back and I'll introduce Sheldon Birnie.
You people love you that come here, whatever it is. You love our way of life. You love our milk and honey. At least you could pay a couple of bucks for poppies or something like that. These guys pay for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada. These guys paid the biggest price.
All right, so thank you to Tim MacMiller from Protest the Hero for that fantastic piano rendition. And, all of that is the lead into our first discussion guest, Sheldon Birnie. Sheldon is a guest that I am so excited to have on the show, and I know that you all will absolutely love this conversation with Sheldon. You out there listening may not know who Sheldon is, but he's completely awesome. So Sheldon Birnie is a writer, family man, and beer league hockey player living in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And he is the author of the book Missing Like Teeth, an oral history of Winnipeg underground rock, 1990 to 2001. And I'm currently reading this book, which is out of print on a hard copy, but is available as an ebook for $5 online. And it's a history of the Winnipeg scene, and it's absolutely amazing. It has the backstories of Corpus Vile, the Royal Albert Arms, Malfaction, Toothpick Hercules, Propagandhi. There's so much Propagandhi history in this book. Tons of interviews, and it's so, so great. And a fellow named Derek reached out to me via email and told me how great of a guest Sheldon would be on the Dear Coach's Corner episode. And Derek couldn't have been more right. So Sheldon and I get into hockey, Winnipeg, the importance of place when it comes to youth hockey, the influence of Don Cherry in Hockey Night in Canada, and his thoughts on loving Propagandhi. And one side note for people outside of Canada, or people who are very, very closely following hockey, Sheldon refers frequently to grapes. He says grapes, says this, says that, etc. Grapes is Don Cherry's well-known nickname in Canada, but unless you grow up under the culture of Hockey Night in Canada, you won't know that Don Cherry's nickname is Grapes. So throughout this chat, when you hear grapes, Sheldon means Don Cherry, the ranter at the start of the song, Dear Coach's Corner. So all of that said, please enjoy my chat with Sheldon Birnie. Sheldon Birnie, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, Sheldon, I'm delighted to have you here tonight, and I am delighted to have this conversation with you for a future episode and interview on our Dear Coach's Corner episode. This is a special one for me, and I'm really excited about this episode in particular. But why don't we start off by having you just sort of introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they can know who you are and what you do in the world.
Okay, well, my name's Sheldon Birnie. I'm a writer, reporter, and beer league hockey player in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. A few years ago now, I wrote a book called Missing Like Teeth, which is an oral history of Winnipeg's underground rock scene from about 1990 to 2001. Features heavily on Propagandhi and related bands that you may have touched on at some point in this podcast. Sadly out of print at this point, but it's available, I think, as a Kindle or a PDF on the web. So, yeah.
Fabulous. Well, I have to give a massive shout out to my friend Jamie Fougere, who tracked down a copy of your book and mailed it to me. I think he tracked down the last printed copy for sale in all of Manitoba.
I think that's true. Possibly all of Canada. In fact.
Yeah. I mean, it was awesome of Jamie to do that. And Jamie listens to the show. So hello, Jamie. Huge props to you. Well, Sheldon, let's get into a little bit about some of your interest in some of the things that you're interested in. So why did you get interested in writing in the first place? Like why, so you have this book out, you write tons of articles. I found your work all over the place. How did you get into writing in the first place? It's like sort of like a career path for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've just done, forever, really, since I, learned how to do it in school. I've enjoyed using my imagination, putting stuff together. And I did a lot of creative writing in like fiction and poetry as an early adult.
Yeah.
And, submitted to literary journals and kind of thought that might be a path. And, quickly discovered there's no money in that and thought, there might be some money in journalism, which, I mean, in my case, that's what I do for a living. It's not, but it's
tough.
It's a dire industry to be in.
Yeah.
But, I kind of stumbled upon that literally at the University of Manitoba. A pal who was taking, like a photographer, just said, why don't you try writing for the school newspaper. Oh, maybe I could do that, trying to be like too cool for that sort of thing. But, eventually tried it out and just fell in love with it. And from there, just pursued any kind of opportunity to write for money or write about stuff I like, whether it's for a platform or whatnot, that I've been able to. And that's been about 10 or 15 years now. So
nice.
Here we are.
Well, Sheldon, you have this extremely niche book out, a story, an oral history of the Winnipeg music scene. And as somebody who makes a podcast literally about one band and their catalog, I am an appreciator of niche things, like big time. So I want to know a little bit about your interest in music and kind of like your path as being like a fan of music in general.
Right.
Like, what's your story within music?
Okay, so the first tape I probably ever bought with my own money was a Bon Jovi tape, and then from there, that was grade 3 or so. I grew up in northern British Columbia in a small city called Dawson Creek, BC. So we had a record store, a top 40 record store, literally that's the name of it, which was like a chain across Western Canada. A 5 and dime version of HMV or something like that. So the selection was pretty limited. No FM radio other than the CBC in the area. An AM radio station seemed to have the same playlist every day. So, it was kind of slow pickings, but eventually Much Music, which is the national MTV kind of version in Canada. They would broadcast kind of late night stuff that was indie or kind of weirdo. They had a show called The Wedge that probably either in junior high, I kind of clued in. It was late night Friday night, so I would stay up and watch that, and started to realize that there was like stuff other than whatever was on the major labels. When I started to clue in that there were bands from like Winnipeg or places that I was assuming that rock stars were from the States or Toronto.
Right.
And, I just didn't have an understanding of how it worked. Right. So I discovered there's a band called Kittens that was out of Winnipeg, and I just thought they blew my mind kind of when I heard them, what they were doing. The fact that they were from Winnipeg was just like, whoa, like what? Like, similar kind of trajectory with Propagandhi. I would have heard them on one of the first couple Fat Records compilations. And a buddy who I worked with maybe at a pizza place where I worked in the summers, Clear Lake, Manitoba, was really, every time the track would come up, these guys are from Portage. So, whoa, like the band could be on this punk rock, then they're from here,
Yeah.
So making that connection that music wasn't something that happened necessarily away, you could do it, was revelatory for me. That was also about the time where, in finding some of these records, the Kittens record or a Propagandhi record, I think the first one I bought would have been about 98 or 99. That Quantity Is Job Number One. Just
heck yeah,
that's what they had at the store, right? And
dude, check this out.
Yeah,
I got it right here.
Looking at that or How to Clean Everything, there's way more songs on Quantity Is Job Number One. I'd buy that one.
Yep.
And from there, I discovered you could mail order directly from the labels or directly from the bands. And so this kind of just spiraled, and I became obsessed with, a couple different indie labels in Canada, G7 being one of them, Sonic Onion out of Toronto being another, and just started mail ordering every time I'd get a check from the pizza place where I worked, or before that, the newspaper delivery or whatever the hell I was doing for money.
Yeah.
Immediately go to the post office and get a mail money order for $12 or whatever it was to get a new CD and send it off, and eagerly wait for the mailman to come with a new CD of something new.
Well, okay, so you grew up in BC, and now whenever I learned about you, I associate you entirely with Winnipeg, just like I do with Propagandhi. So that's not really where you're originally from, but so tell me about getting over to Winnipeg and why this city becomes such a central part of like your work that you get into.
Sure. Well, my parents are both from here, which is the short end of it. So we grew up in northern British Columbia, which is right kind of near the Alberta line, about 6 hours from Edmonton, was the closest city, big city.
Man.
We would spend our summers visiting my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and my cousins and all those folks here in and around Winnipeg. My grandma on my dad's side had a cabin out in Clear Lake, which is a beautiful, cabin country sort of little town in Riding Mountain National Park. So we'd spend, 3 weeks there and a week or two in Winnipeg at my mom's place. And so it was just to me, that was the big city, right? Like, I knew Edmonton. We'd mostly just drive through it to get to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Where I'd go I played a hockey tournament there once. The only NHL game I ever saw as a kid was in Edmonton. So, that was a city, but I knew Winnipeg because I'd spend so much time here and had the connection to it, right?
Tell me a little bit about your interest in hockey and just your history with the sport, like growing up, tell me kind of like where all this comes from. Cause you're on a very specific episode of the show for a very specific reason.
Yeah. So, our family moved to Dawson Creek when I was in grade 2. Didn't know anybody, didn't play any sports. My parents put me in soccer in kindergarten and I hated it. So just, wasn't a sporty, kind of guy. But as soon as I made friends in this new town, every single one of them played hockey. So I couldn't hang out with them on the weekends or whatever because they had hockey. My dad was a university hockey player. He played men's in league and beer league up until his 60s. So he was around the game, but never was one to kind of, push it on us. He'd watch Hockey Night in Canada. And so that would have been my introduction to the game, other than the fact that my buddies at school now are playing this sport and are trading hockey cards all the time. So as a way to, connect with them and with my dad, I guess I just fell into it. I don't think he expected me to last beyond the season, but when the next season came in, he said, okay, sure. You want to do it? Sure. We'll try it out. And I just fell in love with it from there, again, a means of bonding with my peers, something to do with my dad, something to talk about with my dad. It really became a big part of my life.
Nice. Do you remember like when you first like really became a fan of Propagandhi, like, really kind of fell in love with the band? Cause I know you're a huge fan. Like, I know you said that you first heard them on one of those fat comps, but tell me about when they really sunk their teeth into you.
Yeah, it would have been after buying Where Quantity is Job Number One, because up to that point I had just heard the stuff on the comps really, or maybe, in the back of the restaurant, maybe they had How to Clean Everything on here in the rotation of punk tapes that got played while you're cooking pizza or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So in listening to those tunes and then subsequently going back and buying Let's Talk More Rock and How to Clean Everything, reading all the material that came with it, and Let's Talk More Rocks specifically would have been what kind of opened my mind up to it and realized that, wow, like this is heavy stuff, but it's stuff that, I kind of was, leaning towards in some ways, or it was just, concepts that were brand new to me, but that I, kind of felt a kinship to, right?
Nice.
I think also having that huge amount of input from Where Quantity is Job Number One, it gave you the view that, okay, these guys, at some points can barely really play, but they're doing it and they have a sense of humor. And they're, it's interesting to be able to see that much of a band, right?
Well, I tell you what, when I was in high school, I totally, I overlooked that compilation so much. And like, I just thought that it was just like kind of like a bunch of cast off tracks and everything. But like, it's one of the only CDs that I own now. And so like I have like 5 or 6 CDs that are like that live permanently in my car CD changer. And this is one of them. So I listen to it all the way through every single week. And I cannot believe how much amazing stuff is on here. I can listen to that Venom cover on repeat. It's so ridiculously good. It's just full of gems. So every time I find like a cheap copy on like Discogs, I'm always like posting it like, hey, everybody, you should buy this compilation because here's a factory sealed copy and it's like $5. You should buy it. It's got just full of gems. Okay, so let's get into some stuff here. I got an email a while back from a dude named Derek Marvin who wrote me this. He wrote me a huge email and he basically laid out all the reasons why I should have you on for the Dear Coach's Corner episode. So Derek sends me this email. So hello, Derek. And he says, Sheldon should be on the podcast because he is, quote, Alberta born, prairie raised. So that's not quite true. But like, what's your friendship like with Derek, with D Marv?
I've known Derek 15 years at least now, probably more than that for sure. And we met at Clear Lake. I worked at this pizza place that had a bar in the basement where bands would play. He worked across the street at another restaurant, and we both liked partying and music. So quickly developed a friendship. And at this point, we play on the same hockey team. We both have kids, so we don't see each other as much as maybe we'd like. But yeah, he's a beauty, all right.
Well, nice. Okay, so then next, Derek writes, he is the player manager and right winger of the Lumbercats, Division 13 champions of the Dakota Beer League.
Division 12, Derek. That's Division 12.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I literally copied and pasted this from his email. So Division 12, nice little correction in real time. I love it. So he then says that you are a passionate leader for the team and a lover of the game. And the Lumbercats have an annual exhibition series called the Champions Cup against Caress of Steel, Beeve and Chris's rec team. And he says he doesn't believe that Chris has yet played in the Champions Cup. The Beeve, on the other hand, is a beast in the face-off circle. So tell me about playing tell me about this relationship that you have with like this Propagandhi adjacent hockey team.
Sure. Yeah. So the Lumbercats is a team that I joined about 10 years ago. It has a couple years history before that. I'm not exactly sure, but joined the team 10 years ago. Which is, I guess, the same time that Caress of Steel kind of started up.
Yeah.
I sort of know a couple of those guys just from the Winnipeg music scene or whatever. And so as the years go on, you know, Caress of Steel gets an Instagram or something, and the Lumbercats and you sort of see that it's very parallel, you know.
Yeah.
Both teams take a similar approach to hockey. It's a love of the game, but trying to, you know, eliminate some of the toxic elements of hockey culture. Because I think for the most part, both teams are made up of guys who, you know, grew up playing hockey, maybe took a break from it because of the, you know, toxic kind of culture that it doesn't exist all the time, but, you know, especially in the 90s was I would say a big part of hockey culture, and then came back to it in adulthood. This also, I believe, is the same year that the Winnipeg Jets came back to Winnipeg, which I imagine, I don't have any stats to back it up, but I imagine beer leagues had a boost in numbers of registration that year just because people were fired up across the city, right?
Nice.
So anyway, yeah, we you know, between these mutual acquaintances and pals on the team, we don't play in the same league. So we play in a different league in Dakota Community Center, which receives a bunch of money from Jonathan Taves every now and then. I guess when Tavesy needs a tax credit or something, he donates some money to the rink that he grew up playing on.
Wonderful.
Whereas the Caress of Steel guys play the ASHL, which is based kind of more centrally in Winnipeg. So we didn't really get a chance to ever face off against each other, but figured we have about the same skill level, the same kind of mentality, the same approach to the game. And so as a way to kick off the season for the last, I guess not counting this year due to COVID, the last 3 seasons prior to that, we've arranged a friendly match with, you know, pay a referee a case of beer, get someone to run the time clock, and played it out. And so far the Cats are 2-1. You know, we've won the last 2. They won the first one. And I believe next year, if our government here in Manitoba doesn't completely botch the vaccination rollout, hopefully we can take it up again in September.
Awesome. Have you faced off against the Beeve in the face-off circle? Because, you know, Derek said he's real good. He's real tough.
I don't know on the face-off circle. I play wing. I'm a terrible on the draw, terrible pivot. So I don't bother with that if I can avoid it. But he's a fierce competitor. You had Randy Frickus on the show.
Yeah, Randy. Tell me about Randy.
Randy's great. Yeah, he's good to play with if I know he's on the ice. He also plays in a spring hockey team that we sometimes are in the same league with, the Stinkbirds.
Nice.
So I know if Randy's on the ice, I tell the guys to keep an eye on him because he's very shifty. So Beeve in my experience is quite good. I haven't played against Chris in any way other than maybe a shinny match or so here and there.
Nice.
And yeah, that's the Champions Cup.
Awesome. Well, I love it. You know, and I'm currently reading Missing Like Teeth, which is your oral history. And I'm about halfway through, and so many fantastic familiar names come up. Like I'm actually talking to Derek Riel really soon from Corpus Vile, who's friends with Todd Kowalski, and who roadied for Propagandhi a long time ago. And, you know, Chris and Jordan and Todd are all in the book and everything. And John K. Sampson's in the book. It's wonderful. Yeah. So I would definitely encourage people to track down the Kindle version, the ebook version out there. But tell me about why you wrote this oral history of the Winnipeg scene.
So it came about because I was a freelance writer at the time. I had a gig which was, less than part-time as the editor of Stylus magazine, which is a publication out of the U of W, the University of Winnipeg, and the campus radio there, CKUW, which goes back to the late 80s, exclusively kind of Winnipeg and underground music. And digging through the archives when I'd have to be in the office the one day a week or whatever it was, with not much doing, I'd found all these great early interviews or articles about Propagandhi, the Weaker Thans, all these Winnipeg bands that, this content didn't exist online because it was, even if the World Wide Web was around then, but like it wasn't a priority for this student run paper, or if it was, it's in a kind of hard way to search and find, right? Like the archives must exist somewhere there, but not very searchable, not very accessible. And I just kept thinking that this stuff was gold, right? Like for me and people with a niche interest in this kind of stuff. And in trying to write freelance stuff, I had just kind of made some inroads with Vice Canada, and pitched. They had just, I guess, set up their music platform Noisy, which was kind of short-lived. And they had then established a Canadian version and immediately thought, no one writes about Winnipeg, so this would be content that, would be accessible. And at this point, Propagandhi, the Weaker Thans, these guys are well-known bands. Ken Mode, some other kind of noisier bands are established or making noise, but no one's really heard, what started it all. So
what came before?
Yeah, exactly. Pitched an article, probably got paid $100 to write it or something like that. And it was a lot of fun to write. A lot of people were very willing to talk about their experience in the scene at that time. And it created some interest online, like people, whether they were mad that I didn't talk to this band, or they were fired up because Winnipeg was on Vice, or whatever it was, it generated a lot of talk and interest and clicks. Probably, I bet the click meter was high over at Vice HQ. And so for whatever reason, the editor I was working with, who was a character unto himself, was like, do you got any more of these? And so I just kind of, from there tried to pigeonhole more of the scenes into, okay, well, let's go with the PC punk scene that Propagandhi kind of spawned, or the more noisy or big dumb rock and roll, or what have you. And so I was able to, talk to more people, write more articles. And, I think I wrote, maybe 5 of those in the series. And then was able to pitch, kind of adjacent listicles or articles to some other music sites that were around at that time, because there was some interest in it, because it was a story that hadn't really been told. There's been some great, underground music books that have come out of Canada. And, just like a lot of tours that cross Canada seem to miss Winnipeg somehow, or, a footnote here about Winnipeg. There was there's an author, Chris Walter, this, punk rock author.
Yeah, I know that guy. I've read something by him. I can't remember exactly what I read by him, but I have.
He's written a lot of stuff. But he wrote the biography of SNFU that's out there, which is
that's
fantastic. The one. He wrote a few books about the early Winnipeg punk scene in the 80s. But then, he moved to Vancouver, as did a lot of punks, I'm given to understand, at that time. So the 90s was kind of a dead zone. And so it was just an opportunity to write that no one else was taking up, and I rolled with it. And then, because of, I guess, the interest in these articles, the publisher Eternal Cavalier, which was basically 2 guys in Toronto who had an interest in Canadian music, and also saw kind of an opportunity to put some books out that weren't otherwise happening. They kind of approached me on Twitter and said, hey, if you ever want to do something longer, let's talk. And I had a lot of interviews that I was unable to use in a online format already in the can. And so I said, let's do it. I like the oral history format for that, because I wasn't there necessarily, right? So I can't say this is how this happened and this is how this. And so, was able to appropriate that oral history style and let people tell the story themselves, and, try to insert myself where appropriate, but try to let the voices take center stage, right?
Man, I'm thinking about a question now, Sheldon, that's really just intriguing me about the process of putting together an oral history book. So you have these long passages of spoken quotes from the people that you talk to. What is the challenge that you face as the writer, as the author, to make that there's like a storyline flowing from passage to passage when you're jumping from person to person? How is that process like for you?
I would often ask similar kind of questions. And if I was talking about a specific time, I would, okay, what's your experience with the Albert, or what was your first, I would ask similar questions of each of them. And then that way I could flag the responses in Google Docs, so I could quickly search for that. And then again, after, writing 4 or 5 articles that kind of went through lengthy articles that kind of went through the timeline, I sort of had it established in my head, or at least knew where, okay, I've got lots of content here, but I've got a big gap over here. Who can I talk to fill that gap, and kind of patch it together, like a quilt of some sort, I guess.
Man, I can't even say enough good things about this book, Missing Like Teeth. I really hope that people will genuinely go and find the Kindle version or the ebook version, because I am reading it right now, and there's so much fantastic Propagandhi related material in there. Can you tell me a little bit about the projects that you did with the band with regards to the book? So like Todd, Jord, Chris, John K. Sampson, they're all in the book. Can you tell me a little bit about tracking all of them down and what it was like to work with them for the book? Because you must have been stoked as a huge fan of the band.
Oh yeah, big time. That's, I think, why I started doing interviews with musicians back in university, was as an opportunity to ask questions that I wouldn't necessarily feel like I could do at the merch table, or after a show,
Sure.
Hi, I'm Sheldon. Can I ask you a question about this specific thing? So it give you an opportunity to do that,
Yeah.
And so by being a fan and being kind of not afraid to send an email here and there, I'd sort of made connection with these guys over the years. I was introduced to Jord maybe when I was about 17 or 18 through a mutual friend, and I was able to kind of geek out at that point, and and get over that initial sort of thing. And then from there, when I would order from G7, I would, hey, it's me, Sheldon from Dawson Creek or whatever, so I was able to establish a relationship of sorts with those guys in that manner. And then by the time I wrote the book, I'd interviewed each of them at least, once or twice over the years for something or other. So it was fairly easy. And to say, hey, I'm doing this article or whatever. Do you want to sit down and have a beer, or do you want to meet and chat about this, have a coffee, something like that? And so that initially it was just for the, first couple articles that those interviews happened. And again, being so interested in the band, the interviews probably went on for 45 minutes or an hour for a 2,000 word article that I'm also trying to wedge all these other voices and bands. And so off the hop, I had lots of material to work with. And then when the book project came together, and I knew there was some gaps specifically with some Weaker Than stuff, or I hadn't talked to Jord yet, or whatever, I just, again, reached out again and said, I'm on this project, here's where I'm at. Do you have an hour or whatever to sit down and talk?
Did you get in touch at all with Mike or Scott, like the earlier members of Propagandhi at all?
I know through Ditch Pig. They would play at the bar in Clear Lake that I worked at as a wayward youth, and so I knew him through that situation. And so I was able to connect with Scott, and I think I sent Mike an email, or never connected with him at any rate. But, sat down in Scott Hopper's paddleboard shop. He's a paddleboard enthusiast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And he's a character too. He's fun to talk to. He provided some pretty funny quotes throughout the book as well.
Nice.
Now that I'm thinking about it,
dude,
he's a character.
That's awesome. Well, Sheldon, we can go on and on and on about this, obviously, but let's get into Coach's Corner. What do you say?
I'm into it.
Big time. Cool. Game on. I want to start by gauging your interest and observations about militarism within professional sports. I read an article that you wrote about 10 years ago called The Best Game You Can Name, about militarism in hockey. And in that article, you do quote Chris Hanna and John K. Sampson. And it's about when the Jets returned to the city of Winnipeg. Is about the timeline. So you alluded to that earlier. Yep. Is this coming back to this article?
Yeah.
Awesome. So tell me about the significance of like the military when it comes to Winnipeg's hometown NHL team.
Yeah.
How you started to put these pieces together in your own mind. Like, wow, this is an interesting side, like subplot of this whole thing that we're a part of. Tell me about when this all kind of like came together for you as like something you were aware of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, having heard Dear Coach's Corner had come out a couple years earlier. So I mean, that connection was made by listening to that song about 1,000 times, and connecting with it on a personal level, right? So thinking about that, my aunt, she recently passed away, but her career was in the Air Force. She was based in the reserves and 17 wing here in Winnipeg for the bulk of her career. So, the military wasn't something that was foreign to me, so I kind of had to, as a young punk, kind of resolve that in myself, right?
Sure.
Like, I love my aunt. I'm going to be, having breakfast with her or a beer with her or whatever. And she's, in the military, but, so that was something that I kind of grappled with myself. When the Jets came back, they had a history in Winnipeg, as everyone knows. If you look at the branding that went with the original, WHL Jets or WHA Jets through, Jets, couple iterations of their jersey and uniform, it's not, there's no, it's like a passenger jet or a carrier jet. Winnipeg's a big cargo town, big jets flying out of Richardson Airport all the time. And that was kind of the branding. So when they came back, all of a sudden it was, they were leaning into Winnipeg's military history, which, fair enough. Columbus Blue Jackets have got that. It's not a foreign thing, right? But at the same time, it was kind of jarring because the old logo kicked ass. Like, why fuck with it? And all of a sudden now it's just in your face, right? So it's the branding is all about, fueled by passion, and you've got this, fighter jet kind of zooming out at you. The guys are running out of the front of a fighter jet, and it was just kind of jarring because everyone's fired up. They don't care what, you could have put a cartoon playing on the front and people might have complained, but they would have bought the shirt and they would have been there, and they would have, filled that arena for 10 years straight as it is, no matter what. But for whatever reason, the True North went with this really kind of military aesthetic, which, again, to me, I just felt that was a little bit unnecessary. I mean, who knows? They've sold 1 million jerseys, so it works for them. But it was just, I'm nostalgic for the old Jets, but I just felt it was a bit over the line, right?
What's your relationship with the Jets now? Because I know that Chris is super into the Maple Leafs in Toronto. So it's like, I'm wondering about, because it's interesting to me that he's not obsessed with the Jets, that he's actually a Leafs fan. So I'm curious about your relationship with your hometown team.
I love it. I mean, I follow the team pretty closely. I'm a journalist, so I can't afford to go to games or anything like that. I'm lucky if I get to one game a season, I try to get to a couple Moose games. They're a lot more affordable, a little bit more family friendly. I can bring my kid to the game, and it's not so intense or expensive. So I follow the team. I my emotions ride the ups and downs along with the team. It's not a game day today, so I'm not wearing my Jets shirt. But
I live in Buffalo, so it's like we've had the worst year ever. But I grew up in St. Louis, so like I know about that, like the years and years of heartbreak as well. And then the Blues somehow finally managed to win the Stanley Cup in like their 52nd season. But so I'm curious as well about this particular song. So you mentioned that this song did this song make you aware of what was happening in the arena more than you had ever really noticed it before? Or is this something that you already, this song taught you that?
Because like, at that point, I'm not watching hockey every week. The Jets aren't around. I'll watch a hockey game while I'm drinking at a buddy's place at this time. If I happen to be either playing a show at a bar or in a bar and the game's on, I'm watching whatever there, but I'm not emotionally invested in it. I'm not tuning in every week. I'm going to a Moose game, which, they had Moose games at that point. I think they were the Canucks farm team at that point. But if I'm, and even at that point, like I'm showing up after the puck's dropped and had a couple beers already, and I'm probably not paying too close attention, right? So this song kind of brought that to my attention that was happening, and so I'm starting to notice it a bit more. And then the Jets come back, and all of a sudden it's just crammed down our throat, right? It's
awesome. Okay, so what does the song "Dear Coach's Corner" mean to you?
Oh, for me, I
think you said it was a lot. Didn't you tell me it was your favorite song or your second favorite song?
Yeah, I mean, it's up there. The message it's got about, the contradictions of loving a game with so much wrong with it really speak to me, right? Like we kind of touched on the toxicity of hockey culture, which is something that turned me off hockey as a young man. And I didn't play for about 10 years after stopping playing, just because it didn't feel like, something that was in line with the values I had or what I was interested in. But this song, Chris is really grappling with that in the lyrics, right? He's addressing both these horrible things he's seen, watching a game, but also, trying to wrestle with why it is that he loves this game so much. And, that kind of allowed for an avenue for myself to kind of re-examine my relationship with it, because, as a kid, this hockey meant so much to me. Even when I stopped playing, it was, if I didn't have something to talk to my dad about, we could turn the hockey game on and chat about what was going on there, and we'd immediately have that connection, right? So it was something that I kind of had lost for a while there, and so that kind of allowed me to sort of reevaluate my own relationship with the game, and I still think about that while I'm engaging in hockey now. My son's 5. We haven't put him into any organized hockey at this point, but we're out there skating a lot, and I think a lot about what do I value from the game, and how do I want to pass that on to him? Do I value running all over the city, just trying to get him to compete to get to this next level? Or do I value the time spent with peers, playing a game for fun, having some time with parents or other people in the community that's valuable? That's the kind of things that I've taken away from the song, but also, kind of applied or thought about in my own life. And so hearing that song anytime kind of brings that back to me, right?
Yeah, and so this song, it starts off with a clip of the notorious Don Cherry spouting off about the troops. And so, growing up in the States, I didn't know who Don Cherry was until I started hanging out with some Canadians in 2007. I didn't know about Hockey Night in Canada because I grew up in Missouri. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we can't see those things on TV where I was from. And then in 2007, I was in a relationship with somebody who was Canadian, and I started learning about the immensity of the hockey subculture in Canada that, you always know is there when you grow up in the States, like how big it is in Canada, but like, you don't really get it until you go there and you experience it for yourself. So, visiting Saskatchewan a bunch in the years between 2007 and then I lived there in Saskatoon from 2009 to 2011. I did my master's in Saskatoon. And so you really start to get a sense of just how ingrained a person like Don Cherry is in the Canadian psyche, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can tell me, from your perception as a born and raised Canadian person who is into hockey, about your perception of Don Cherry, his importance in Canada, and how what he has said on TV throughout the years like gets into the minds of generations of Canadians. Just how important is this person?
His influence, particularly from the mid 80s, right till, he got pulled off the air in 2019. And every year it was kind of like, when are they going to put this horse out to pasture? Because he was frankly losing it for quite some time. But for 20 or 30 years, it would be hard to overstate his influence. He was on primetime hockey every Saturday, every week. So you got Hockey Night in Canada, which is traditionally a Saturday night doubleheader. For those who don't know, you got probably the Leafs or the Maple or the Habs, sometimes playing each other. So the big ticket on the first game, and then a game featuring a Western team in the second half. And Don Cherry and Ron McLean, who joined him in the mid 80s, I believe it was Dave Hodge, started the show off with him in the early 80s. Anyway, you had this two iconic duo coming at you after the first period. So right around dinner time for some households, right before dinner for other households, depending what time zone you're in. And Grapes is telling you what's happening on the game, what's going right, what the team should be doing. This is that. This guy's a good guy. This guy's a bad guy. He's out there, and like, it's hard not, having seen where he got to, it's hard not to love the guy. He was very of his time early on, even though he'd say stuff where, like, throughout his whole thing, he's disparaging, anyone who's wearing a visor, or a European player, or a French Canadian. That's his whole thing, and it was always there. But I don't know that it was acceptable in the 90s, but that's just what you saw on TV, and it was not challenged, right? So I mean, yeah, it's hard to really overstate his influence. And I mean, as a kid, you're watching that with your parents. So unless your parent is telling you Grapes is full of shit,
Yeah.
you're not hearing that. You're saying this guy is the best. That's Grapes. He's the guy. Grapes knows hockey. You know, he's the guy who knows. Ron MacLean always was kind of tasked with being, the vaudeville straight man or whatever to John Cherry's act. And he, I don't think that would be an easy job for anyone, but he did what he could do. And whether he tacked in his little comment at the very end, right before Grapes had time to say anything, he'd provide that. And I think a lot of, maybe hockey parents, would feel that, why couldn't Ron speak up a little bit more or whatever? Because Grapes is just a bully, right? He always was. But in a lot of ways, he's like your uncle who might be kind of an asshole, but you love him because he's your uncle.
Yeah.
And, he was the coach in the National Hockey League. And so you got to listen to Grapes. Beyond that, I don't know, did you in the States have the series of Rock'em Sock'em videos?
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Okay, Don Cherry also, on top of having Coach's Corner in the Toronto area, he had like a call-in or a sports radio show. So he's out there not just on Hockey Night in Canada, but he also had this series of tapes, which was called Don Cherry's Rock'em Sock'em Hockey, which came out from every year from 1989, right before Christmas. And it was kind of like a greatest hits of the last hockey season with Grapes as the narrator. Lots of good goals, lots of beauty plays, some great saves from Eddie the Eagle or whatever, but lots and lots of hits and a few fights. It wasn't as like a hockeyfights.com situation, but you'd get a few dust ups in there. And Grapes is the narrator, saying, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy throughout that whole thing, on top of a soundtrack of like jock jams,
Nice.
And I mean, my parents would never allow us to have those tapes, but almost every kid in Canada, who played hockey would get that be under the Christmas tree at Christmas.
Nice.
And to not even get into like the headshots or CTE or any of that stuff, which looking at those tapes now, they're still, enjoyable to watch as a moment of their time.
Yeah.
But it's pretty crazy that, Grapes is, again, if there's a French Canadian player who doesn't want to fight someone, he's a sissy or whatever, or, the European, of course, he doesn't want to get in the corners. It's that kind of attitude was
right.
He's not hiding it. He's old school, and he was old school in 1982 or whatever when he first got on the air. And that was just his role, was to be the voice of old school hockey, the way it should always be played. Good Canadian boys playing a tough sport, and that was Grapes' unwavering for 30 plus years, right?
Was he always extremely outspoken about the military, or did that become more like post 9/11 kind of thing?
I believe that it's a post 9/11 thing in Canada. Shortly after 9/11, I think even up into the Iraq War, we had like a liberal, quote unquote, liberal government. The Liberal Party was in power, which is a center right kind of party. Their type of nationalism is more of patting Canada on the back.
Right.
But about 2000, and I want to say 2004, but it could be even 2006, they were out, and a right-wing party,
Harper,
Stephen Harper, that fucking guy, came in, and he really was like, he wanted to be George W. Bush's best buddy.
Big time.
So that kind of mentality became more into the mainstream. Anyone who, might have been that way, thought those thoughts, lived their life that way, suddenly was a little bit more emboldened to do so, and rewarded for it, right? So I think that Cherry's overt militarism probably cranked it up a notch, and then just went, pedal to the metal from there.
Gotcha.
I have to go back to review tapes and such, but that's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the song starts off and says, "Dear Ron MacLean, dear Coach's Corner," and it's leading in from this rant that Cherry does, and I'm wondering if you know anything about the story behind the ranting at the beginning of this particular song.
Yeah.
That the band samples in this track. Do you know anything about this story?
I looked into it in preparation for this, because honestly, when I first heard it, it could have been any Saturday night that Don was saying shit like that, right?
Yeah.
It just happened to be near Christmas. And so I thought that maybe just, everything was aligning for it to be a particularly choice quote. But frankly, it could be any time that Don Cherry's in front of the microphone that he's going off on shit like this. But digging back into it, I found a Globe and Mail article article from William Houston, December 24th, 2007. And he kind of does a play-by-play on that week's Hockey Night in Canada, where it starts off.
I just found the article. Sweet.
Yeah.
Here it is.
So you could link to that for folks who are more interested. There's a series of kind of, things that Cherry says that Ron is trying to back up against, because Ron's trying to talk about, systemic racism against Indigenous players. Cherry obviously isn't having any of that. And then it goes on to, I guess there was a segment the week before where Ron MacLean had kind of done a brief little profile on Boston Bruins defenseman Andrew Ference, who, if you know Don Cherry, he's a notorious homer for the Bruins because he was a coach for the Bruins.
Yeah.
For him to say something negative about a Boston Bruins player is shocking.
Wow.
And he goes on to call Ference Dr. Suzuki and a left winger, even though he's a defenseman, because of Ference's involvement with the David Suzuki Foundation. Ference,
the Canadian professor.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Environmentalism. Ference, for whatever reason, connected with environment. I guess he was an early kind of adopter of carbon offsets, however much you put into those, but realizing that hockey players are flying all over the goddamn country all the time, and kind of realized we got to do something about this. He created a program for NHL players to invest or to purchase carbon offsets that then went somewhere or other, to kind of level off what they're doing with just through their jobs traveling everywhere, right? He's involved in some other stuff, but that was the focus of Ron's little piece on him, a little heartwarming tidbit of information that Cherry just can't handle. And that's where he goes off. What are we talking about? Saving the world here? Let's talk about some good guys, which is just ludicrous when you think about a good Canadian boy from Sherwood Park, Alberta, like Ference here, trying to do something good in the world. But he's, labeled a left-wing kook and a bad guy in Cherry's worldview, right? So
wow.
Looking into it, it was a little bit more shocking than I thought, but because I'm just so used to Cherry's, Grapes just fucking, he knows hockey, he knows whatever, right? So he'll say whatever he thinks.
What a great selection for the band to choose, because Propagandhi is a band that obviously would care about something like what David Suzuki would care about, and this is a really well selected quote if you think about that, then as far as the context of what Propagandhi has been about for their entire career. Ooh, interesting. Okay, so the next thing that happens in the song is there's several locations listed. Fargo, Penhold, Gatineau. We have a lot of listeners in Europe. We have a lot of listeners in Australia. And I'm curious if you can tell, and a lot of listeners in Florida, like in everything. What can you tell me about the importance of like some of these geographic locations that Chris goes through? Like, why does this detail matter within the story of this song?
So my understanding, and I could be off on this, is these are likely places that Chris has actually played hockey in. Coming from a military family, I understand, he did spend some time in Alberta. Perhaps, I don't know this, but maybe he was out in Ontario or Quebec at some point. Gatineau is right beside Ottawa. Fargo is a couple hours south of Winnipeg and has big youth hockey tournaments. So these are ostensibly places that he's just played, but geographically you've got southern Alberta to the border of Ontario and Quebec, and then down into North Dakota. So you've got a big swath of the country that is covered by that. It kind of feels a bit like the old Johnny Cash number, right? I've been everywhere, where he's just kind of bragging a little bit, but listing that, I've played all over the place here.
Awesome. All right. So then we go into, I'm writing in order for someone to explain to my niece the distinction between these mandatory pregame group rites of submission and the rallies at Nuremberg, specifically the function the ritual serves in conjunction with what everybody knows is in the end a kids game. So as someone who grew up in the US and has watched sporting events become more militarized over the years, like you can't go to a game of any sport now without like a support the troops standing and waving section where 20,000 people are expected to get up and clap. And it's creepy. It's a creepy feeling whenever 20,000 people all stand up and you're like in your chair and all of a sudden you find yourself rising just out of like instinct of self-preservation, Like this concept doesn't surprise me going to the sporting events that I go to in the States, but this song like legitimately did surprise me because it was in Canada that this is like, that Chris is talking about this, the place that American liberals like to threaten to move to because of its allegedly more peaceful nature, right? So American liberals glorify Canada like crazy as this like promised land of peace and anti-war, et cetera. And I'm just curious about like what your observations of militarized sporting events in Canada is like now, as the years have gone by and as you become more aware of this. Is this like a countrywide thing now there like it is here?
You know, we sort of touched on this just a couple minutes back where we talked about Stephen Harper and the kind of rise of that very nationalistic rhetoric on the national level with him. And I mean, he was in power for about a decade, and you saw that kind of escalate to the point where when he was kind of scrambling to try to hold on to power, he was trying to promise a snitch tip line nationally for terrorists or people engaged in, like, you know, he's really pulling stuff out of the far right playbook in the States. And when the Conservative Party lost the election to Justin Trudeau's Liberals, it was a pretty it was a big loss. Like, they got kicked to the curb because I think they'd gone so far to the right, and it was unpalatable to, you know, in quotes, right, everyday Canadians. And now they like their center right rather than their far right. So I wouldn't say it's escalated since then. It's still there. There's especially we've talked about the Jets, right? The military sort of imagery is front row and center. I'd like to think that they've done more to, you know, also address other groups and to kind of spread the love around. I know the True North does some good things. They do, you know, like an Indigenous night where they come out and they've got a land acknowledgement before every game. You know, this game is played on Treaty 1 land, and
interesting.
So there is some progressive stuff that's happened, but I don't think it's they haven't walked it back so far either, right? You know, the military appreciation nights are still a part of the schedule, I think, probably for every Canadian team.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Chris directly talks to Ron MacLean,
right.
And he's like, you know, I wouldn't bother with these questions, but you and I were sort of like kindred spirits. And I'm wondering if you can tell me about your feelings on that line, because to me, it's just a beautiful human to human moment where Chris is like, you know, like face to face saying, dude, tell me what you really think about this.
Yeah. Well, again, for folks who never had the opportunity or the dubious opportunity to watch the Ron and Don show over the years, like, he was constantly playing that role of trying to rein grapes in, trying to keep them on script, and then having whatever script was there just blown up by some insane comment, whether it was, you know, questioning someone's manhood or throwing in some sort of, you know, racist or homophobic, whether it was a direct, you know, in his later years, he was starting to say stuff that was directly racist or homophobic. But earlier on, it was very kind of, you know, casual, what's the word I'm looking for there? Microaggressives, right? Like, that was just his persona. Whereas in later years, it kind of became a little bit more to the forefront. But Ron is always there trying to rein that in. And you know, if you read anything about him or you engage with Ron MacLean outside of that kind of partnership, he seems like a really decent guy. You know, he's a ref to some level of hockey in Alberta, or was for a long time, and that's a thankless job, right? And he does this hometown hockey bit on Rogers Networks now, where really profiles the small town community based culture of hockey across Canada. So he seems like a guy, you know, that you could level with, and so that speaks to me in this song as well, as you're trying to say, like, come on, Ron, like, just fucking put Don in his place. But if anyone, you know, who's engaged with a big bully, a brash bully who's been emboldened in their position for decades, it's, you know, it's not as easy as it as you'd like it to be, right?
Yeah, well, and as somebody who lives in the U.S. and just saw the madman's dream of a paradise play out in real time on the national stage in front of the entire world from 2016 to 2020. That line hits hard now, man. A madman's dreams of a paradise. And I'm wondering on your thoughts on that specifically, because I'm sure that you watch from north of the border, like, holy smokes, it is like ridiculous. What were your thoughts on that line and how that speaks to like what's going on down here?
It you know, it seems prescient at this point, whereas when he wrote it, I assume it was just a a comment on
theoretical.
Theoretical, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as you've mentioned, you've seen that play out to a truly disturbing level, right?
Terrifying.
And, I mean, in Canada, you like to pat yourself on the back, but in Ontario, you've got Rob Ford, who Don Cherry loves, the Ford family. He was a big supporter of the younger Ford. Rob Ford was the first. Doug Ford is the current premier, and he has just mismanaged the COVID-19 pandemic to a frankly astounding degree. But so that kind of right wing everyman bluster and bullshit that Cherry embodied, you see that in Canada. You just might not see it on the national stage. Our premier in Manitoba here has completely lost the fucking plot as well, and it's because of that kind of mentality.
Yeah, well, and what's crazy is there's a Don Cherry's restaurant on the shores of Lake Ontario, about 10 miles from me in St. Catharines, and right there in Jordan Station, Ontario. And I drive past it every time I go up to Toronto or go see my buddy over in St. Catharines, and I'm like, oh, there's Don Cherry's restaurant right there. So this is like this song to me it's a really big deal, Sheldon. Yeah. Like a really big deal. But I'm wondering if you could also talk a little bit about the musical performance of the song as well. It's super long. It's very slow. Besides the manic intro.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what the tone of this song means with the musical performance, because it really brings the message home hard because of the pace. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that at all, about how you feel about it.
I would preface any comments from myself by noting I have no musical theory background whatsoever.
Nor do I.
I couldn't tell you what Chris is thinking on it. By listening to it, that manic intro catches your attention. It's like thinking about this the last couple of weeks. It reminds me of a Rock'em Sock'em video where it's it's the title sequence. You're all the hits. You got Probert smashing a guy in there. You're catching everyone's attention. You're getting the listener's attention, and then you're coming into it and you're laying it on the line. The heavier parts are the ones really driving home the message, where the slower ones are more of a pleading kind of tone. And so I think that's obviously deliberate from Chris's point to get the message across as something that, there are so many, to speak to my demographic, so many guys in Canada who grew up with, playing hockey, loving hockey, grew up with, whether it was a terrible toxic environment like you hear sometimes, or even just, a passively toxic environment. Like in my case, I never had a terrible hazing experience. I never, as a white guy, experienced racism on the ice. I heard it from other players to other players, right?
Yeah.
But just that toxic kind of culture was just kind of pervasive. So I think in addressing Ron MacLean as the, as a guy who you can address, I think he's also doing that to the listener who maybe fits the same demographic, right? It's like, here's some things that you may not have thought about watching Hockey Net in Canada every week or going out to play hockey with your buddies. There's some things about this game that need to be fixed, right? Whether it's on the ice with headshots and people, losing their mind to CTE, killing themselves at early ages because of injury that could be avoided by putting a fucking rule in place that says if you hit someone in the head, you go off the ice, right? Like, you think that'd be a thing, but because of hockey culture, it still gets away with it, right? Or to the more serious aspects of the culture of racism or sexism or homophobia that still exists in hockey, by slowing it down, but also presenting it with this kind of imagery and the heaviness of the music too, I think is a way to open the door to listeners, right? And to have that conversation.
Sheldon, I'm curious about, so you're a dad with a young kiddo, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas on what you're going to say to your kid the first time that they're at a game with you, and like it's all about like war and military all of a sudden. I'm wondering if you've thought about that dilemma that you'll face as a parent, because Chris is saying to Ron MacLean, how do I even address this with my niece? So, are you thinking about that question with how you're going to think about it with your own son? Because imagine you're Chris and you wrote the song,
Yeah. We have discussions when, it seems like every little boy loves guns and stuff like that. And so we try to have those discussions around like, this is a fun toy to play with, but that'll, in real life, that's not cool, right? Like that's, we get the Winnipeg Free Press every day. So often, especially in the past year, there have been some pictures on the front page that are pretty heavy. So, I mean, he's 5, so he can only understand so much, but we try to have those kind of discussions when it comes up. I haven't thought directly of like, what I'm going to say if
it's tough, isn't
I
it?
see a huge jet plane come shooting across the ice at us or whatever. But, I think in listening to Chris's podcast on the Patreon page, he's mentioned a couple times through a couple episodes, how his focus as a parent has now shifted to like the hyper kind of community level,
the hyper local
level on trying to embody the values that he holds and express those on whether it's at the level of being engaged in the local community center sport, or whether that's a block party, and just trying to live those values and have those conversations when subjects arise. And that's something I think a lot about as well.
Nice.
Going back to my own experience in hockey, I never played at a competitive level. It was always a recreational house, level. My dad, having played, higher level hockey, was in A, you're probably not good enough. And B, like, you don't want to be fucking driving 6 hours to go play 2 games and then driving, like, don't worry about it. Let's just have fun out there.
Nice.
And that really, at the time never, really clued in. But now as a parent, I think a lot about, how wise a decision that was, how much I value the time spent, playing these community level, recreational level games with him opening the bench, for us, or out on the ice, passing the pucks for a drill, So I've tried to do that, with my son.
Nice. Yeah. The toxicity of the road trip for like the soccer tournament or whatever is like something that I have no interest in as a parent. I'm amazed how many people punish themselves and their kids with that. All right, it's Saturday. We're going to go drive 5 hours and you're going to stand in the blazing heat playing baseball for 9 hours. And then we're going to drive all the way back and hooray for the weekend.
Yeah, I do credit my dad, who my mom did some of the driving, but my dad did a lot of it, because in the town we're from, we had one other team at our level, so we'd play them occasionally, but every other game involved at least an hour drive on the highway in the winter to some other town. If we're playing over in Alberta, those fucking rinks they had natural ice, so it's -20 outside, it's -20 inside, and it's house level hockey, so in the end it doesn't matter except for the experience of playing the game, which in the end is what's important, right? So I do value the time that him and the other volunteer parents and coaches put into fucking hauling a bunch of dumb, stinky kids around in whiteout conditions or whatever on the weekend, right?
Oh man, yeah. Well, Sheldon, do you have any stories of like seeing Propagandhi live that really stand out to you that you wanted to share before we wrap up tonight?
Yeah, I've seen them plenty of times since moving to Winnipeg. I'd hate to admit it, but they all not blur together, but did a lot of drinking before or during some of these shows. So it'd be hard to pinpoint any of them. I love when they play in Winnipeg, because I know as soon as the tickets go on sale, I'll buy 2 or 4 or whatever I can. And if my buddy didn't get one, I'll make sure he's got one. And, you'll see folks at the shows who maybe haven't seen since the last show or some other show. And it's a beautiful thing to get out and experience that. But the first time I saw Propagandhi would have been the Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes tour. I was 18, very green to the world, really, but had met Jord that summer through a mutual friend at Clear Lake. Had explained that, I'm going to be in Vancouver when your guys' show is there, but it was before you could buy tickets on the internet. Like, how do I see your shows? No problem. I'll put 2 tickets aside for you. Oh, awesome. Email to confirm them later, and then get to the show and get to the front door. It's on like a Legion Hall in East Vancouver. And they're like, who the fuck are you? We don't have any tickets for you.
Ugh.
Oh no, like, but, and then out of the side door pops Jord all of a sudden. And it's like, oh man, they don't have tickets for us. Oh fuck, I forgot. Come with me. And just got us in, and it was amazing. It blew my mind, it blew my eardrums. It was probably the loudest show I'd seen to that point.
Yeah.
And really just, from then on, I've seen them any opportunity I can get.
Are you 37? That album came out when I was 18 also.
Yeah. I had just graduated high school, and I had gone to Vancouver to do like college at one of the colleges there. Quickly after the first semester, moved back to Dawson Creek because it was too big of a city for this country boy. It was a bit of a shock. Yeah.
Well, Sheldon, as a closing question tonight, I'm just curious what you can say, like what Propagandhi means to you about the court, like as just a fan of music and as a person who cares about the world. Like, what does this band mean to you in general?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this as Less Talk More Rock celebrated its 25th anniversary this week or last week or recently. So I've been thinking about that, and it's hard to overstate the influence that the band has had, historically on me as a young guy growing up in a small Canadian town. Their story just resonated with me so much, and what they were doing. And that continues to this day, 25 years or 20 odd years later, seeing the work that they put into every record, the work they put into community engagement or activism. Todd, the work he puts into his artwork is just inspiring for a guy like me who, I like to still write creatively and stuff. And that's just a passion, but, most of the world doesn't give a shit if you do that kind of stuff. So, but seeing people who I could consider, who I look up to, but are also peers in some way, focus so hard on the art that they create and then trying to make the world a better place it continues to be inspiring for sure.
Well, Sheldon, Birnie, this has been just an absolute pleasure chatting with you about Coach's Corner, Missing Like Teeth, your fantastic book, All Nature of Hockey, talking about, Don Cherry and Ron McLean and Coach's Corner. I'm just so grateful to you for your time and your energy and talking about this very complicated and very deep song and your connection with it. So I'm just so grateful you're willing to do this with me.
I'm thrilled and honored that you would even ask me. So it's the pleasure's all mine.
All right, that was my chat with Sheldon Birnie. Thank you so much to Sheldon for that deep dive. And we have another guest on this episode. Keith, are you a Poli fan?
I am, yeah.
Nice. Well, this is a really, really special interview for me because Scott Radinsky from Poli is on this episode. And, Scott is such an important vocalist to me. He's hands down, one of my favorite vocalists in punk rock. No one sounds like Scott Radinsky to me. He's got a one-of-a-kind voice, and his bands have always impressed me. I love the fact that he was in a band with Jim Cherry, no relation to Don Cherry, from Strung Out, and Jordan Burns from Strung Out. Like, I think that's really, really cool that Poli started as like this like punk rock supergroup collaboration, and the band is still going today. And so I'm really excited to have Scott here. Scott used to also play for the St. Louis Cardinals. And one time my friend and I went to a game in St. Louis and we bought seats near the dugout and we were yelling at Scott Radinsky in the bullpen, like 10-foot pole, what's up, Poli? And like, we were just so dumb, it was years and years ago, but I'm really excited to have Scott on this episode. But a little heads up on this interview. Scott spoke to me on his cell phone while he was driving through the mountains of Southern California. So the sound quality on this interview isn't quite the same as what you may be used to on this podcast, but this is still a rad conversation nonetheless. Scott talks about playing shows with Propagandhi in rural Canada in the 90s, which you'll also hear more about on our upcoming Rattan Kane episode. He talks about the increasing frequency of military involvement in Major League Baseball after 9/11. And he talks about what Propagandhi means to him. So before we hear from Scott Radinsky, just remember that he was talking to me on the phone in the mountains. So enjoy my conversation with Scott Radinsky from Poli.
Hey, Scott Radinsky, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. Excited.
Dude, this is so cool. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have a really good time today. And so just a bit of context for listeners on this episode. They can find out all this stuff about you if they don't know, but you have a really cool history in punk rock through your work in multiple bands, Scared Straight, 10-Foot Pole, Pulley, and a baseball career, which lasted from like 1990 to 2001. And you pitched for Chicago, LA, St. Louis, and Cleveland. And I saw you pitch for the Cardinals because I'm from St. Louis. I saw you in the stadium a whole bunch of times, so that was really awesome. It's really cool to talk to you based on my personal experience with you. And then you also have a lengthy coaching career. So I'm here today to talk to you. We're going to talk about all that stuff, but I'm going to tie in your fandom of the music of the band Propagandhi. And I got a message from your graphic designer, Stein, who does Pulley's graphic design. And he wrote to me and he said, hey, Scott's a huge Propagandhi fan and he has tons of stories. So big shout out to Stein. So Scott, how'd you find the work of Propagandhi first? When did you first hear them? How did they come onto your radar?
Well, we were actually in the studio recording. And I can't remember what year it was. It was probably somewhere around 92 or 93-ish maybe. Mm-hmm. And I had purchased a big shuttle bus, and me and I don't know if he was called Fat Mike at the time, but Mike from NoFX and this other friend of ours, Tim, we're gonna have this bus, and we were gonna like basically rent it out to these bands. And NoFX was gonna take it on the first tour. So Mike and Tim drove it down from Northern California where we purchased it, and they came to the studio one day where we were at just to come check it out. We were recording it was a Scared Straight. It ended up being a 10-Foot Pole release called Swill. And in the van or in the bus were a couple of the guys from the band, and I'd heard of the band but not really heard the music, but I knew they existed. This is pre-internet days, so it was a little different back then to expose yourself to bands. So Mike came down to the studio. They hung out for about a half an hour. I was super excited. I walked out to the band. I wanted to see the bus. And those guys were inside the bus. They were actually the first people to ever be carted around in what we ended up eventually calling the Matters Mobile. And so that was kind of my first introduction. And they were down in LA to record their first Fat record, How to Clean Everything, and that was kind of my introduction to them, at least in person. And then when we were going on tour, we had an early copy of that CD, and I think we wore it out in Europe for 22 straight days. It was really cool.
Nice.
We all became instant fans. Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. The Matters Mobile, and obviously you named a Pulley record after that vehicle, didn't you?
We did. Our last Epitaph release was called Matters.
Fantastic. So you were in the thick of things in California in 80s and early 90s for the punk scene. And I'm curious about your, impressions of these guys from Winnipeg, who's like a 30-hour drive away. What was special about their sound that kind of like shook things up a little bit whenever you first started listening to that record?
When I got a hold of the CD, and I had heard it actually at home before we went on tour, I brought it on the road with me to our tour in Europe. I turned everybody else in the band to it. The first thing that jumped out at me was their tones and the sound and just the absolute aggression and anger in the music. And it was cool, like the opening song, like the line, we strive for something more than a faded sticker on a skateboard. That kind of made me, that kind of perked my ears up. It's like, wow, cool. They're not just going to be another Fat band.
Yeah.
And they actually had something to say. And it's funny because, as I've read over the years, to veer away from that, they even made even more of a conscious effort to not be like that jock type following band. They didn't, because everybody was following the Fat thing, and it was I don't want to name call, but like that Pennywise crowd that just listen to that music. And And it was cool that they actually had sound. They were unbelievable musicians, and you could hear it in the record. You know, as a person who plays as well, you could hear it, and there was like a sincere, genuine message, which was awesome, just awesome to hear.
Awesome, yeah. Do you have any other did you wind up playing with them at all back in like those early '90s days when they were just around for the first few years in the States touring?
Not in the States, but we did play with them a few shows in Eastern Canada, and I want to say it was Todd's first gig with them. It was the winter. It was somewhere in December. I want to say 96 or 7. I can't remember what year, but Less Talk, More Rock just came out, and they were still a 3-piece, and I know they were Todd's first shows, and that's when I saw them for the first time, and just literally shit my pants. We played a show in Quebec City, and it was just 3 guys were making those sounds. It was incredible. It sounded just like the record. Chris absolutely ripped on guitar and sang at the same time, and his style and singing. First of all, playing and singing is hard enough, but his style and singing is incredible. Jordy, just an absolute shredding drummer, and like I said, it was Todd's earlier. It was like the first handful of shows he'd ever played.
Nice.
And his stage presence was awesome, and his fist pumping to the crowd, kind of what you see nowadays. But it was very impressive. We played the show in Quebec City, then we played a show way up northern Eastern Canada. It was called Alma. We called it the North Pole. It felt like we were driving hours in the snow, and we got there, and it was like a hall show. And there was nobody there. And then a couple busloads of kids came, and there was like 100 kids.
Oh my gosh!
And then another couple of busloads of kids came, and there was a few more 100 kids. And I guess the way it worked up there for these shows was part of the admission for buying your ticket was because kids were coming from so far around. They had a school bus that would bring you. So it ended up being within like an hour period. There ended up being like 500 kids that showed up to this show that, like I said, we called it the North Pole. It was way the hell up in the eastern northern part of Canada there, up Quebec. And that was just another great show, another great night. And then we had a couple nights where we played by ourselves, and then we reconnected again in Montreal at a bigger venue. And it was kind of cool. They were, they wanted to charge like a percentage for selling T-shirts. We're going to sell them outside. So we, of course, said, yeah, sure, we'll do the same thing. And
nice.
We all boycotted the club and sold them outside. One thing I do remember about those shows was they had a guy, and I don't know if he was a tour manager or just like a stagehand or a guy that went with them, but he kept commenting about leave the crowd with more, leave them with wanting more. And their set time was 30 minutes every night. And that was a bum out for me because I wanted to hear more. And they played, they only had 2 records, but they definitely had more than 30 minutes. And it was pretty cool, but they stuck to that. And it was awesome to finally meet them and be able to hang out backstage and talk and ask questions, like why they didn't tour more. Did they want people to like them? We had all these kind of curious questions like, well, do you guys put out music and really not want people to show up and see you play? And it was completely the opposite. They were just real genuine guys, and it was super cool.
Awesome. That's something that a lot of my friends and I growing up in St. Louis, we were always like, does Propagandhi even care that we like them so much and we want to see them play live? Because we never had the chance to see them live for years and years, and we just like were growing up like convinced that they hated all of us, even though they were putting out these records that we loved so much,
Oh, yeah. I remember our bass player. I remember him asking Jordy. He said, Jordy and Chris, Todd was a little kind of, like I said, he was a little more like kind of kept to himself, and Jordy and Chris were a little more outspoken with us. And I remember like our bass player asking, he said, do you guys book shows in a city and then go show up and play a show in a different city just to piss people off? And we all kind of laughed at that, but that obviously wasn't the case.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Were you able to like keep in touch with them at all after those 90s shows?
Sad to say, but not really. I can't even think if I've even reconnected with him anywhere since then. But I can tell you that I've probably turned on over 100 people to the band that might have been in the punk rock in the 80s, in the hardcore scene, and like, well, there's this band that probably, if you were still in the scene, I guarantee you'd like them. Yeah. You definitely like the message and love the music, but yeah, no, I've never. But I've turned on a few people that have been in contact with them, and I think through those people, there's been like a mutual, like, oh, hey, say hello, and that way, but not actually in person now.
So, Scott, you threw me for a loop a little bit whenever I reached out to you, because you're in these iconic bands that began in the '90s, and Paulie's still going today, obviously. But when I reached out to you to talk about a song from Propagandhi, you chose a mid-career tune, "Dear Coach's Corner." And upon reflection, I was like, oh, this is the perfect choice due to your long professional sports career. But, the song is about watching the military presence within a hockey game and how fans cheer as, like, showings of force are used as, like, a prop to pump people up with, like, patriotism. I'm curious. Right. I'm curious why you chose Dear Coach's Corner to talk about for this podcast.
Well, I mean, like I've mentioned to you, there's so many songs to choose from, and you sent this list of songs that were used and songs that were available. And I mean, I'd be lying, and I don't want to sound like a total fan person, but I'd be lying if I there's probably 60 songs I could choose from. I could choose them all. The first record and the second record definitely were probably the most listened. I mean, the second, not to veer off from your question, but the second record, I was pitching for the Dodgers at the time, and we had just done those shows with those guys. And the record, the Let's Talk More Rock was like just ingrained in my brain. And this is pre-iPod days. And I would go out into the bullpen with a CD player, a portable CD player. And I'm sitting in the bullpen with 6-7 other guys, and I got this disc that, on the cover of the disc, it's gay positive, pro-feminist, animal friendly. And, here's these guys looking at me like, geez, what's up with this guy? Yeah. You know what I mean? That record, I put on my headphones. I just totally isolate from the stadium and everything. And I would just sit there and play it over. And I just keep, play again. I just kept getting it over and over. And I probably listened to it like 3 or 4 times before I'd ever have to get in the game. And it just kind of pumped me up. But as far as Dear Coach's Corner goes, that's one of my favorite songs in that supporting cast record. I can remember I was coaching for the Cleveland Indians. I was in Columbus, Ohio, and I got a hold of the record, I want to say in spring training at some point. Might have come out in April, March, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so it was early in the season. And where we were located in Columbus, we had a road trip game in Toledo. And because it was like an hour, we would just drive our own car as the coaches. We didn't ride on the bus. So I remember driving in my car and putting that CD in and just having I guess after being in spring training for so long and, just having headphones or a little whatever, I was listening to it in the car. I cranked it up and, the first track comes on and it's like, you hear that intro of just noise, just all this crazy shredding noise, and then it just goes into just one guitar and his vocal, and it just, being a musician, there's certain hooks that just kind of catch you, and I mean, regardless of what maybe the definition behind the song would be, I'm not a super hockey fan, but I get it, and I understand the whole sports world, that mentality. I don't know if I've ever completely fit into it. So, their message of, I want to say the guy's name's Don Cherry, some just real idiot. I know it starts off on the plane, but, they're referring to the talk show, I believe the Canadian Hockey Talk Show. And like you said, they mentioned, about the, I even saw a video clip of this Don Cherry guy coming out in almost like a tank looking thing on the ice and wearing his army helmet, and just that machismo mentality in sports, and I don't know, just I think I enjoy music, and I don't want to shortchange myself when I say that I don't appreciate lyrics, because I mean that certainly defines the song, but that initial hook and that initial riff and just listening to him sing what he sang. And then, I've seen quite a few videos where, they started opening their set with that song. And it's a powerful song to me. It's just a powerful song. It hits home. So if that's my long-winded answer of, why I chose that song, I guess just, mostly, the music and the message. Just like I would say the same thing about every Propagandhi song.
Do you have any standout memories of the military being actively involved in the stadiums you've played in around the country?
Oh, most definitely. There's always a big thing on, big flyovers in a lot of stadiums, for the national anthem. I know in San Diego, which is a big military port, a big naval port, there's always sections in the stadium where, you might see a few hundred guys in their sailor suits. And I want to say pretty much since the 9/11 attacks back in the early 2000s, there's been a pretty big deal. After the seventh inning stretch, they sing this, the God Bless America song, and then they bring out these old time veteran guys and they put them up on the, today with us, World War II veteran. He's on top of the dugout, and they're always paying their respects to that. But that's probably the extent of it.
Yeah, gotcha. Growing up, I watched so much baseball, so much hockey. I was a huge Blues fan, huge Cardinals fan. And I think back on, like, the power of the commentator, like Harry Carey, Jack Buck, Joe Micheletti, Ken Wilson. Like, these are names that are, like, forever burned into my mind because they were piped into my living room every single day for, like, my entire youth. And Don Cherry, the guy that you were mentioning, is a household iconic name across Canada, just like a Harry Carey or a Jack Buck. And he wielded the same power about commentating. How powerful is the commentator's role in sports? Like, how much do those voices matter about what kids learn through their televisions growing up watching sports?
Oh, well, there's no doubt. I mean, I grew up out here in L.A. with the legendary Vin Scully, who did baseball. I wasn't a basketball guy. I know they had this guy Chick Hearn. The tone of their voices is very distinct, and how they portray the game and what's going on. You listen to you mentioned St. Louis for an example. I think of Jack Buck, very meticulous, soft-spoken man. His words were, every way he put things was very eloquent. And then you go to the radio station, you listen to a guy like Mike Shannon, who's just a hard-nosed, gritty guy, and everything's kind of more rough-edged. So it's such I think it defines everything in how you think. Like, when I think Dodger baseball, I think of Vin Scully, and his voice is automatically what I think of. Like you said, you mentioned the Cardinals. I'm sure growing up, Harry Carey or Joe Buck or Don Rooney now, or whoever these guys are, they describe the picture for you, at least on radio, that you don't see. So they're painting the image, and a lot of times their voice and the words they use and how they speak is like painting that canvas of what you're supposed to be seeing. I think on TV, it's a little different because, we get the visual with our own eyes. But when you're listening to the radio, to me, those are the guys that are, those are the real true broadcasters to me that like, I think there's an art to radio because you have to let the air breathe a little bit. You have to let the crowd noise be taken in. You have to, be able to call the game and like I said, paint the picture. Where TV, a lot of times it's the former player. He's a color guy, and he's given his perspective of what it was, be on the field, and there is the the number one guy who's broadcasting the game, and his voice is important as well. But like I said, I think with the visual in front of you, it's I don't want to say easier, because I'm sure it's not an easy job, but it's a big part of defining a team and kind of like almost like a reputation of who they are.
Nice.
That point.
Yeah. Well, so the song Dear Coach's Corner resonates for you as well. So you're a coach. You've been in coaching now for a long time. And if you were a coach turned commentator, like, Don Cherry, imagine that you wanted to focus on specifically on the art of the game in your broadcasting. How do you think that you would feel if you were Ron McClain and you were seated next to a co-host who started talking endlessly about, troops and military and police while you were trying to commentate a baseball game on the radio?
Well, I mean, me personally, I probably would last a day, and then I would just hand in my papers and say I resign. Or I would ask the guy when the mute button was on, like, am I allowed to cuss on this channel?
Yeah.
I would ask him, like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? What does this have to do with baseball? This isn't, asses wired tight and go to the ground. This has nothing to do with, we're not going to war here. We're playing a game. And to me, it's like, I guess I kind of don't get it. It would be tough to sit next to somebody like that and who wasn't similarly, I mean, you want to have some differences, but I don't want to sit and talk military during a sporting event, me personally.
Yeah. So over the years, Chris Hanna from Propagandhi's vocal delivery has changed a lot. And you're a vocalist yourself. I'm curious if you have any specific or cool thoughts on Chris as a vocalist in general, and how he's developed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll touch on the songwriting first. Like I mentioned earlier, to be a guitar player and sing is a tough task. To do it well is even a tougher task. To be an absolute shredding guitar player, and I don't want to embarrass the guy and say genius with the words that come out, but they're well written songs.
Yeah,
and I think they're well thought out. They're obviously super educated people with great values and morals, and they're very conscious about what they say. They're not just writing anything. And I think as we evolve, over time, every record you do, and I think it's great that they haven't steered too far, really. I mean, you can listen to the first Propagandhi and you can listen to the last Propagandhi release, and I mean, it's still Propagandhi. Now the songs are more intricate, they're more technical. I think I think those guys' metal background has a big part in some of the riffs and some of the things that they play out musically. But I think it would be a disservice if you didn't evolve, and I don't know if he could have done anything any different. I think the path that they've taken and the musical direction that they've gone, and how he's become vocally, I mean, it only gets better for record to record, and it's one of those things where, like, if you're a fan of Bad Religion, you're going to like every Bad Religion record. And, for the most part, the songs kind of all run the same. I mean, I feel that way about my own personal band. And, I mean, if you're a Propagandhi fan, you're going to be a Propagandhi fan no matter what they put out, because it's pretty genuine. And I can't think of too much. Now, there's songs I like more than others, but I don't think there's anything that sucks. And so as far as the involvement, I've gone along with every record, and I've been satisfied, completely happy with the direction that I've heard them go.
Awesome. Are there any other stories about Propagandhi that jump out to you about the last say 27 years or so before we wrap up our chat about the band?
Well, no, I mean, a lot of respect, the walking away from Fat Records. I think, them standing up for what they believe in. I just saw them recently, I think maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I saw them, or I couldn't even tell you. It wasn't that long ago. It was first two I saw them with I don't know how to pronounce her name, Sulin.
Oh, Sulin, yeah. Yeah, Sulin.
And so they played a show in downtown LA, this place called the Regent Theater. And, I'm guilty of calling the people at the tap and asking if I can get put on a list. It's a great club called the Regent Theater. It's in downtown LA, and it's kind of a dirty shithole. And it's in Skid Row. And I remember parking the car, and I walked up, showed my ID, walked through the venue. There's like a lobby area. Went through the double doors, and right as I walked through the double doors, the lights went on, and they started to play. And I sat there in the back, right next to the soundboard, and I honestly felt like I was listening to 5 different records. It was absolutely perfect. And that's kind of like my impression when I saw them as a 3-piece, back in 97 or whatever year it was. And I thought, Jesus, it just continues to get better. And the live show is if you're a fan of music and you want to go watch a band play live and sound just like the record, that's a band to go watch. It was great. And the singing, the crowd, I wish I could see them more often. I wish I could have an opportunity to go on tour and maybe have like that nightly experience, because that's, I'm not exaggerating when I say they're probably one of my more favorite bands in this genre of music. And like I said, I turn anybody on I can at any time, and you got to listen to this. And it doesn't matter which CD or which record I pull out of the stack. It's like, you got to check this out, because it's all good. And the cool thing is, it's not all the same.
Yeah, it's not.
It's good.
Yeah, and
that's what I like about it.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad that you were able to see them live recently, especially with the new lineup with Sulin involved, because every time that they switch it up a little bit, it's like a new era of the band, and it's just something special waiting to hit you. You know what I mean?
She rocks, man. I mean, I hope she sticks around. It seems like she's gonna for a while. I believe she lives in Florida, but yeah, she absolutely rocks. And and you look at the other side of the stage, and then you see Todd. Jesus, I mean, this guy's he's bouncing all over the place, and half the time his left fist is in the air, pumping to the crowd. It's awesome. It's a good lineup right now, and I scour all the time to where are they playing? Is it anywhere close to me? And unfortunately, we're in times right now where nobody's playing, but I can't tell you how much respect I have for them and how good they are to see.
Scott, are you doing punk rock bowling in Vegas next year?
I do not believe so. No,
I know they're playing there, so I know that they're supposed to be at punk rock bowling next year. So Vegas is just up the road from you, so maybe it'll be a 2021 punk rock bowling.
Year?
What?
They were going to play this year, right?
Yeah, but I think it's just been. I think the lineup has mostly been postponed to next year, I believe.
Right. We had some shows booked in Europe during that time, and I believe that's all been postponed for the same time, sometime in May. So trust me, if it doesn't cross paths, I would, more than anything, I would be up there to go check it out. That'd probably be the only band I'd want to go see up there.
Right on. Well, Scott, I am so grateful to you for hanging out and geeking Propagandhi with me, telling stories from back in the 90s, touring Canada, driving through the snow. That bus story of like the kids arriving at the bus in the middle of nowhere is just fantastic, and you just can't get that stuff unless on a podcast unless you track down folks who are there like yourself. So it's just so awesome that you were willing to spend this time with me today and tell those stories.
Hey, Greg, thanks for letting me relive those times, man. Those are special times, and I'm thrilled to sit back and relive it. Those are awesome times.
Dear Ron McLean, Dear Coach's Corner, I'm riding in order for someone to explain to mine is the distinction between these mandatory pregame group rights of submission and the rallies at Nuremberg. Specifically the function the ritual serves in conjunction with what everybody knows is in the end a kid's game. I'm just appealing to your sense of fair play.
When I say she's puzzled by this incessant pressure for her to not defy collective will, get a rim in the pills as the soldiers inexplicably repel down from near inner rafters. It's not so insane, big ground for screaming laughter.
Dear Ron McLean, I wouldn't bother with these questions if I didn't sense some spiritual connection.
We may not be the same, but it's not like we're from different planets. We both love this game so much we can hardly fucking stand it. All born, very raised, in a sheet of ice, not far to run and play. Well, too. You gotta know every fond memory of childhood that I know. Somehow connected to the culture of this game, I just can't let it go. I guess it comes down to what kind of world you want to live in. Diversity is disagreement. Disagreement is treason. Well, don't be surprised if we find ourselves reaping the strange and bitter fruit. It's sad old man beside you keeps feeding to young minds as virtue. It takes a village to raise a child, a flock to raise the children, till they are nothing more than dollars for fulfilling
a madman's dream
of a paradise.
Complexity
reduced to black and white. How do I protect her from this cold of death?
Okay, so wow, what an amazing array of guests. Seriously, like, so thank you to, let me go through this list. Thank you to Sheldon Birnie, who is a fantastic Propagandhi fan, great author, does important work about Winnipeg music. Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you to Scott Radinsky from Pulley. That was sort of one of those moments for me. Like, I think back on like the John Darnielle interview, like chatting with Scott was like that for me. I've been listening to Scott's voice since like 1995, man. And so to hang with him and have him talk about why he loves Propagandhi and tell old tour stories is just so cool. And to bring his years and years of professional sports wealth of experience into a conversation about the militarism within sports is awesome. So thank you to Scott for speaking up on that. So cool to hear your perspective. Thank you to our musical guests, Tim MacMiller from Protest the Hero. You are like the coolest dude ever, Tim. I'm so glad to have you as a collaborative partner on this show. And also thank you so much to Emilie Plamondon from the Punk Rockette podcast, and also to Karl Bullets. Haven't talked to Karl beyond email, but thank you so much for your fantastic cover. So Keith, we got a lot more to talk about. So what do you think, man? Where do you want to start today?
Let's get into the music, Greg.
All right. So the first thing that we should talk about is Chris Hanna's guitar solo at the very beginning of the song. Chris did a how-to video when this album came out, explaining how to play this solo, and then he demonstrates it. So just in case you missed that way back in 2009, here is Chris Hanna explaining the Dear Coach's Corner guitar solo.
Hi. Hi. Hi there, my name is Chris Hanna. I'm from the band Propagandhi, and I'm going to show you the technique required to play the solo from the beginning of the song Dear Coach's Corner from the LP, CD, and cassette supporting cast. Now, this solo requires a commitment and a discipline to mechanics that is second to none. So I suggest you start practicing your guitar, and then I'll show you the solo. The progression here is very complex. So you first start with your right hand. You start the solo with your right hand, and your left hand around 6 to 8 inches near the fretboard, hovering above, say, the 1st to the 5th fret. And then you go through it very methodically, and repetition is the key here. So let me just show you the solo in its entirety. Okay.
Okay, Keith, what do you think about that video?
It's so stupid. I remember the first time I saw that. It might have been a year or two after it was posted and published. And at first, I'm like, "Is this real? Like, what's going on here?" And then, of course, like, all right. He had one, pulled one over on us.
Yeah. Well, so I was looking at the Sheet Happens supporting cast book. And there is a specific note on how to play this solo in the beginning of the book. And this is a far more serious note from Chris. So he writes, the key to the solo at the beginning of this song is to essentially ignore the tablature and tap into your inner rage and or joy. The notes aren't particularly important. The goal is to transcribe the experience of a high-dose intravenous DMT injection onto the scalloped fretboard of your 7-string powder blue Jackson Dinky. So this is a super, like, this is like a solo that is super rad, but it really just does tap into an energy, and Chris really does give it an original flair every time they play it live. He really just, it's just a moment where he just unleashes on his guitar in a show. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I think there are probably going to be similarities between different performances and different versions of it. But I don't see it as being a solo or maybe a technical riff from, say, Tim from Protest the Hero, that is going to really try to nail something super specific in a composition each time they play it. Here feels a little bit more organic, and it might change however the band and however Chris is feeling that night. And that opening riff, Greg, we kind of have to mention that's the music used as the intro to Chris's Patreon podcast. So every time I hear that, I always wait for that kind of digital fade out to happen, and then Chris to start talking, because I've listened to the podcast so much. And that riff is so neat because it really walks a fine line balancing punk and also kind of thrashy metal. And the solo, like we said, is kind of unpolished. And I like that. I like that it's chaotically blistering. To me, it sounds more like Rain and Blood Slayer than, say, like Rust in Peace Megadeth. It then leads into the clean riff that has really bright and vibrant tones and textures. Chris is just really like, you can hear his vocals super high up then, because the music is fallen back. There's like this crooning feedback that finds its way after a few lines of the lyrics. The drums start to build piece by piece in the kit as the first verse continues on. Todd is added into the mix, balancing things out, and accompanying Jord. And it has this really great, subtle composition that takes shape in a really short period of time. And I think it really stands out how long you said this song is in the intro, because it doesn't really feel like that.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Todd, he has a note on the bass tablature book in Sheet Happens also. And this is a really interesting comment from Todd, because it gives some history of the recording of this song too. He says, the bass tab in this book shows the way the song was recorded. However, in bars 50 through 63 and bars 108 through 115, I have found that when we practice and play live, it's much more enjoyable and sounds better when I use my index finger to curl the pick in the palm of my hand and slap the low E notes with my thumb, then pick all the other notes with the pick. When played live, bars 108 through 115 are played with the half note slaps instead of the low E eighth notes. And when recording this song, for some reason, I took the safe route in case the slapping stuck out weird or annoying in the mix. And the song was the first one we recorded for the album, and I wasn't quite in the groove yet. So that's a note from Todd. So first of all, Lordy, this is the first song they recorded for the record while in the blasting room. Like, wow, really amazing. And I was curious about what Todd meant about the slapping. And he says he did it live. So I went and I found some videos of them playing this live. And the Sydney Moshcam show version of this song has very, very clear thumb bass slappage, right? Slapping to bass. And so from minute 120 to 135 on that Sydney Moshcam video, you can hear Todd going bump, 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 bump. Whenever Chris is singing underneath like the main verses, whenever the like clean guitar, Todd is doing the bass slapping, and you can hear it really, really clearly. And I think it's awesome that they road tested this and Todd sort of felt it out over time, because it just shows that art is constantly in flux, like a river, right? It's constantly flowing and nothing has to stay permanent. Just because a song is written and recorded doesn't mean it can't adapt and flow and change with time as the artist's feelings change about that piece of work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great description, because so often, if we don't have a chance to see these bands live, or if you really just have the album, or it's a while before albums come out for any particular band, I mean, the studio version is what you know best. So you may not be aware of the evolutions taking place, and to see that and also to hear the explanations why, I think shows how like something can still be improved upon when artists are not wanting to just settle into a particular groove.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Jord too. This is such an interesting tune. There's several things I really like about Jord's performance. And thinking about the drums on this song, I went through and I wanted to watch some playthroughs. So I found a really good playthrough video on YouTube by a drummer named Nick Malik. And something that I had not noticed on this tune is the unified kick and snare at the beginning of the song, when the vocals come in underneath with what everybody knows is in the end a kid's game. It sounds like there isn't a kick drum right? It just sounds like hi-hat and snare. But then there's those offbeat kicks, okay, that Jord does every now and then. So it almost sounds like there isn't a kick drum underneath with what everybody knows is in the end a kid's game. It's just like bop, 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 bop. But then I watched Nick's playthrough video, and Jord is hitting the snare and the bass drum together. And I was like, why do these drums sound so interesting with just a hi-hat and a snare drum? And it's because Jord is hitting the kick drum on the same beat as the snare. And it like, you almost can't you can't hear it as a distinguished kick drum. So instead of it being like boop, bop, boop, boop, bop, boop, bop, boop, bop, bop, it's just bop, bop, bop. But he's hitting the kick drum the same time he's hitting the snare.
Yeah.
And it's just these little things that Jord does that other drummers don't seem to do. And it's just so cool how what sounds like such a straightforward snare and hi-hat mid-tempo beat has this little extra hidden kick that gives it extra oomph that makes the recording of it special. And those are the kinds of things that make Jord special. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think there are other parts like throughout this song. I mean, that, and even I mentioned the clear tone and the quieter, clean riff during the kind of the verses. You know, these are some things that perhaps I don't know if I really heard Propagandhi do up until this point. And building off of that, when Chris sings "When I Say," she's puzzled by like that part. I think what's striking is that the music itself isn't something that's going to play in my head. Like, that's not really a riff that I'm going to hum, especially compared to, say, the intro riff. But how it works with the lyrics is just what makes it so good. And then the song then returns to that building momentum that takes place during the verse. And the band, though, kind of picks up where it let off before the pseudo chorus. Where the music repeats that, like, you know, "When I Say," and then also Alberta Born, that part. But now when it kind of comes back to that clean part again, the Beeve is adding a ton of flair with layers of melody and rhythm to the main riff that Chris is playing. I think the song has some of the best harmonized vocals, like with "I Just Can't Let It Go," like that part.
Keith's singing, everybody.
It's like that's followed by one of my favorite sing-along parts in the band's entire career. And the riff from the verse repeats. It's played a little faster with some different sound effects and a little bit, some distortion. There's that really pensive and melodic and slightly somber and slightly hopeful outro riff. I think just as a whole package, musically, the song is distinct. It works so well with the music, and it kind of makes sense why it would be, not just lyrically, but why it would ultimately be such musically one of the best or most streamed versions online, or most streamed songs online.
Yeah, and before we get into the lyrics themselves and unpack this thing, I want to talk about the vocal delivery and why this song is cool. If you listen to the Bandcamp demo, you can hear how hard this song actually is to sing. I bet Chris was singing nonstop when they recorded the demos that he has up on the Bandcamp, but hearing him on a standalone vocal demo, because usually you layer vocals in the studio, but on these demo versions is like just one vocal track, right? So it's very raw. And it doesn't have fancy blasting room recording stuff. It doesn't have Jason Livermore and Bill Stevenson manning the dials and the knobs and stuff. But it gives the demo gives this tune a different mood and a sense of how this song would feel to sing into a microphone, because Chris sounds like he's working harder on the demo than he does on the record. The record makes it sound easy, and the demo shows the real work that went into this song. And so here's a clip of what I mean of Chris on the demo to hear what it sounds like.
And the rallies at Nuremberg, specifically the function, the ritual serves in conjunction with what everybody knows. Is it the end of kids' game? I'm just appealing to your sense of fair play when I say she's puzzled eye. There's incessant pleasure for her to magnify. Collective will, get a rip in the bell as the soldiers.
So you can hear the strain, like the work going into that, right? And it's really cool to hear it in that alternative fashion, pre-blasting room. But the thing that really stands out in this song's vocal performance to me is how vulnerable it is. If you think about a band like Propagandhi, which has a pretty relentless catalog of fast tunes, this song is a plodding, slow burn, which seems like such an unlikely choice to become a fan favorite, like on its surface, right? It's almost an exclusionary song lyrically too, because if you don't know what Dear Coach's Corner is, you feel excluded from understanding the song.
Right.
If you don't know who Ron McClain is, you immediately feel excluded. If you don't know who the sad old man is that he's referring to, it's immediately exclusive. And so the slowness of the song, and if you watch the band play this, all of a sudden it's Chris strumming by himself on a clean guitar in a loud room where people just want to rage. You know what I mean? And the band opened their sets with this song for years. The last time they played Buffalo, they opened with Dear Coach's Corner. And so this is such an interesting one because like it starts off with all of the energy that everybody wants from a Propagandhi show, and then it hits the brakes real hard out of nowhere. And you have all these people that will just want to go off, and all of a sudden they have to wait and they have to be patient. Does that make sense?
It's kind of a later version of Less Talk, More Rock. Like we're going to trick you into thinking we're here just to party and just to be here for the music and the scene. But we have more to say than just the solo and just the blasting riffs.
Yeah. So let's get into the lyrics. What do you think, Keith?
Yeah, Greg, a lot of these episodes, I felt a level of intimidation speaking at length about really complicated issues, social and political, historical and economic conversations that we've had. And I would wager that our average listeners, like me, have working knowledge of, but not expertise of, just like us, of those kind of more complicated conversations. But I feel a little bit more exposed here because now we're talking about something that everybody knows a lot about, and that's sports, specifically hockey. And I'm not into sports at all. Like, I used to think I hated sports, like equating football and basketball just with jocks and bullies, macho meathead mentality. I don't anymore. But the fact remains that I don't really follow sports. I don't watch them. I don't like them, but I also don't dislike them. So there's the whole kind of performative disinterest where people are going to call it sports ball or whatever, just to let everyone know they don't care about the Super Bowl or whatever games on it. And yeah, that's not me. I mean, I think that's just kind of repetitively annoying and unoriginal. But I've been to one hockey game ever. And the only thing I remember from it, seeing the Blackhawks when I was in 6th grade, is people yelling racist slurs at Mike Greer from the Edmonton Oilers.
Oh,
and that's all I really remember from going to that. And
wow.
My dad sitting next to me and other people sitting nearby, and his coworkers were with us. And I kind of kept waiting for some adults to maybe say something or to move. But we kind of just sat there as he says, things like, that's what you happen when you let them play hockey.
Oh, wow.
And I was just, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, like, like I had heard racist things before, but it was always something that was confined to the context of, the security of your own home or in a car, but not in public. And that was a very jarring moment for me. So, Greg, you texted me something before this episode, and you said, maybe anticipating a little bit of my anxiety about this, but you said just bring yourself to the podcast. So that's what people are getting today from me. Just me. I'm not an athlete. I'm not anti-athlete. I'm just a person who most days, like, I literally don't remember if there is the letter E in hockey. Like, so that's what I'm bringing to the table, people.
Nice. Well, and that's why I got Sheldon. Sheldon Birnie is such a fantastic hockey commentator for the show. And Scott Radinsky brings years of professional athleticism into our episode. But one of my earliest memories of going to hockey games is my dad and I used to get 10-game package tickets to see the Blues when I was a kid. And so I would go down to the old arena in St. Louis near Forest Park. It was nicknamed the Barn, but the name was just the arena. And used to be called the Checker Dome back in the day as well. I think my dad saw Rush there. And so one of my earliest memories is being in a game against the Detroit Red Wings, and the referees made a call that everybody in the room vehemently disagreed with, and just the chant broke out among 17,000 people, bullshit, bullshit. So I'm like 5. Yeah. And this is one of my earliest hockey memories is 17,000 people chanting bullshit for like 5 minutes. I mean, it was, they went all in. So, it's an interesting thing to reflect upon my earliest days of what it means to go to a hockey game. And, I haven't had many experiences like that, but that was like the golden years of like Brett Hall and Adam Oates and like, Vincent Riendo and Curtis Joseph is so great. So that's my earliest hockey memory. But whenever we think about the opening line here, dear Ron McLean, dear Coach's Corner. So Sheldon and I talked about this, but Ron is Don Cherry's co-host of many years on Coach's Corner. I first watched Coach's Corner in 2007 when I went to Canada for the first time to Saskatchewan. Nipawin, Saskatchewan is where I went to. It's 3 hours outside of Saskatoon. And I was so enamored by Don Cherry's jackets. He wears these wild suit jackets on camera, and watching Cherry's Coach's Corner seems like the whole time Ron McLean is like sighing and wincing and trying to keep Don Cherry sort of contained, which is like a horrible position to be in for a person all the time, because you're constantly trying to talk about hockey and you have this other person who constantly is not talking about hockey when your job is there to talk about the game. But I dug into McLean a bit and found he's been subject to a few controversies himself, but I think they're likely due to Cherry's mania, that McLean was just trying to get through the segments, that he found himself sort of nodding and being like, yeah, which doesn't fly anymore. You can't just be like, yeah, let's move on in our modern era. Like, we are dedicated to progressing beyond tacit approval or silent complicity. We're moving beyond this as a society. Everybody can see it happening with each passing day. And so if you are on screen with Don Cherry ranting and you give a thumbs up on camera, that is not going to fly anymore. So here's an example. On January 16, 2010, Ron McLean presented a pregame piece together with NHL representatives focusing on Vancouver Canucks player Alexander Burrows in a follow-up to an earlier incident between Burrows and a referee, in which the credibility of the referee was called into question, and the piece was considered by a number of prominent sports writers and the Vancouver Canucks coach and some fans to be a one-sided smear against the player. And McLean appeared on Vancouver sports radio shows in January of 2010 and strongly denied being biased or one-sided during the presentation. So that's one example. And then in 2017, McLean had to apologize to Canada Post workers for suggesting their jobs were effectively obsolete. In November of 2019, Don Cherry made remarks on Coach's Corner suggesting the Canadian immigrants benefit from the sacrifices of veterans who, and like they, don't wear those remembrance poppies. But McLean was nodding along during Cherry's rant and flashed a thumbs up sign at the end of the segment that Don Cherry got fired for. So McLean had to go on television by himself and apologize for staying silent during Cherry's remarks. And they announced shortly thereafter that Cherry got fired. And it was decided that Coach's Corner would end. And in November of 2019, McLean addressed and reflected on the incident during Hockey Night in Canada and announced the end of Coach's Corner. So here's a little clip of Ron McLean's reflection after Don Cherry's firing.
Welcome to our first intermission. You know the story. The Coach's Corner is no more, and it's 34 years. Look, we are all hurting. I have collapsed 100 times this week, if not more. We're all disappointed. Bobby Orr's disappointed in me. Bobby, I'm disappointed in me. I've sat all week long reflecting, listening to you, and I have heard you. I mean you, the viewer. I've reflected by listening to my own heart. And they say, I've struggled mightily to find the words, and I'm not sure I have them even now, but they say it's a good thing because when you can find the words, it's dead in your heart. And it's not dead in my heart. By the way, Don Cherry, we have communicated. We talked a lot on Monday, and then by phone. I was there in person, and then by phone. And he sent me a note yesterday. I phoned you, by the way, Don, at 9:30 this morning when we normally talk, and you didn't. I don't know if you're at the cottage or just couldn't. But Don said, Ron, a lot of people will be watching this for a while. Don't go too far, which made me smile, of course. Don Cherry telling me not to go too far. But it's nothing, I don't want to be cavalier in any regard. I don't want to be sanctimonious or righteous in this address that you and I are having. This one plunged deeply into our hearts, right? You know why? Because it's about relationships. Biggest thing, it's about relationships. Don's and mine, Coach's Corners and yours and Don's. It's certainly about hockey, the teammates, the bridge building that hockey represents. It's about life in Canada. So all I can do is unpack my heart a little bit here and then see how you feel. The news cycle. I should say sorry to all the journalists who called this week and I didn't return calls. I know you understand why, but it would be about personalities, about rivalries, about divisions and failures, about all that drama. And it's not about Don and me. It was clearly about something bigger. I haven't spoken, so let me go back to last Saturday and just sort of take you through the last 30 seconds of the Coach's Corner. Don typically, beautifully had done the story of two young minor hockey boys who had died that week. And I had been in Welland the night before, and I knew how traumatic it was for the hockey community and the tragedy for the family. So that was there. Then we were moving towards Don's beautiful Vimy Ridge video, and I was kind of processing what he was saying and thinking I wasn't in an ideological bubble at all. I might have been in a friendship bubble, but because I was kind of praying that I don't think I'm hearing trouble, but I might be hearing trouble. Anyway, it was done. And then you called us on it, which I thank you for, because that's the new world. You don't have a pulpit like Coach's Corner or the CBC News or the New York Times or the Guardian that just pronounces and that's it. Now you have in real time social media and a kind of a democracy happening, and so you caught it. And knowing what to overlook is wisdom, right? And I felt so bad, and I apologized immediately. And Don, Don, defiant. There were steps that needed to be taken because of what had been said by Don, and he didn't want to do those steps. So he made his choice, and I made mine. And then the next choice, which was a really hard choice, probably the sleepless nights all week are mostly about this. Don's my guy. I'm in a foxhole with Don, and I've decided to go one way and he another. And you say, okay, how can you choose principle over friendship? But I had to. I thought a lot about falling on my sword, too. And then I thought, no, but if I do that, I infer what happened was right somehow, or that I'm going along to get along, or that I'm going to just sit silently by or be a bystander again in a situation. And that, it just took the courage. Don taught me to stand, right? So I had to have the courage of my convictions. And that's what I'll say about you, Don. I love you so much, and you always say you spoke like a 32-year-old American Hockey League player. You were always the captain, the leader of your hockey teams, the coach could count on to take care of the troublemaker, and you taught me to be that guy. And so here I am, sort of standing up and taking this position. But that doesn't mean, anything in terms of my respect for you or my judgment of you. We will never do anything in the first intermission on Hockey Night in Canada. We have, like the country, to reimagine ourselves, and there will be, a possibility of this really bad, unexpected thing to do some good things, I hope. But we honor what you've meant to the game, to the fact that you have been there for human beings and sentient beings. Just a fantastic human being, and so I love you very much, and we honor you tonight in this last talk about A Coach's Corner.
So even though Don Cherry got fired for that, Ron MacLean, has been drugged down by Don Cherry, right? By association. And Chris mentions that in that interview that I cited from 2009, where he says that Ron MacLean represents some of the things that Chris Hanna loves most about hockey, and Don Cherry, it represents the worst things about hockey. And Don Cherry's character clearly drugged down Ron MacLean. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so the next lyrics here read, "I'm writing in order for someone to explain to my niece the distinction between these mandatory pre-game group rites of submission and the rallies at Nuremberg." And Greg, I'm sure that it's not lost on our readers that last week we talked about Die Jugend marschiert with lyrics that are set up, like a transcripted public speech to the parents and the youth visiting West Point, unveiling these ideas of propaganda and militarism and nationalism. And here we have a song penned as an open letter. And I really think some of Chris's best lyrics are like this, when he employs a particular writing device. Comply, resist comes to mind as well. And you described the lyrics of Die Jugend as being a little bit jammed into the music. And I get a little bit of that feeling here. Not that they're jammed or that I'm saying that as a critique, but that the music and the lyrics were perhaps written separately and then worked and reworked to fit together in a way I think probably more successful. It's because some of the patterns and the vocal patterns are just really unorthodox. So we're really hitting back-to-back songs that tackle and dismantle nationalism and jingoism 2 weeks in a row, and both tracks make allusions to Nazi Germany. Die Jugend with a Hitler March song that's sampled in the intro, and Coach's Corner with a reference to the rallies at Nuremberg. So from the Nuremberg Municipal Museum's website, it says here, the Nazi Party rallies were held in Nuremberg from 1933 to 38, served primarily as a setting to show the regime and Adolf Hitler to orchestrate the concept of a Volksgemeinschaft, or the people's community, and to arouse popular enthusiasm for war. Yet these events, which last up to 8 days, are only one highlight in the National Socialist year. So some other details, and just think of the parallels here with mainstream spectacle professional sports. The Nazi Party rallies serve to present the Nazi regime's self-image, both domestically and abroad. There are parades. There are uniforms and military displays directly related to the Nazi state's preparations for war. First and foremost, the Nazi Party rallies appeal to the participants' and spectators' emotions. Politics are something to be thought out and understood as an experience. Those are things that should be experienced, and participants from the SA, the SS, the Reich Labor Service, the Hitler Youth, the League of German Girls, and the Wehrmacht are selected to fit National Socialist ideals of appearance. So like last week, I don't hear this song, or I don't hear the band here violating Godwin's law, like the idea that if an argument goes on long enough, someone's going to call someone else a Nazi. Like, I see the references here to the Nazi rallies as a bullhorn reminder to start seeing the stagecraft that has become wallpaper in Canada and in America, the things that we've accepted as normal, and that's just the way it is, are anything but normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it just shows the fragility of what makes a society function in a particular way. Like, we take so many things for granted about the fabric of society and just assume that just because we have certain institutions in place that those things can never fall and can never drag us down. But which we know now is very, very reckless thinking, considering the last 5 years of this country, which hadn't happened yet when Propagandhi wrote this song. 2015 to 2021 had not happened when this song came out.
Right.
And this is so much more real now. But like, this song, having Chris's niece watch this, and then like watching the pretty intense armed forces appreciation events that often occur before and during all professional sports games, up to and including driving Humvees out onto the ice and making laps, and like, highlighting a service member who is in the crowd in uniform every single game. And then the fact that like 20,000 people are just expected to magically rise to their feet and applaud this person that we've never met. We don't know anything about their experiences. We don't know anything about their story. It's literally fabric on a body that we are then totally expected to applaud with zero information other than that clothing on that human body. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, these lines are really important to me. And it's like, then we have this, specifically the function, the ritual serves in conjunction with what everybody knows is in the end a kid's game. And I really like this line because if you think about minor league sports, college sports, high school sports, we have not this level of like patriotic injection and jingoism is percolating down through all levels of sports. We're not just talking about the NHL, the NFL, Major League Baseball, or the NBA. This is happening in countless levels of sports where all of a sudden, like the old saying is that like, I'm thinking about this line. There's like an old joke where I went somewhere and something else broke out. So like this one, it almost feels like I went to a military parade and a baseball game broke out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So then Chris sings, I'm just appealing to your sense of fair play when I say she's puzzled by the incessant pressure for her to not defy the collective will and yellow ribbon lapels as the soldiers inexplicably rappel down from the arena rafters, which if not so insane would be grounds for screaming laughter. And this is a specific reference to an incident during which 4 Canadian soldiers literally rappelled down from the rafters onto the ice at a Maple Leafs game in 2007 at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto. So this is something that I'm sure Chris, being a massive Leafs fan, saw in real time. Like, I feel like this is a legitimate thing that, he watched like in real time and probably was like, I can't believe my eyes. But this isn't just limited to hockey, though. There's a YouTube music reaction channel that I like called Vin and Sorry, where Vin talks about being at a Patriots game and having F-15s fly over the stadium during football games in a show of military strength where everyone in the crowd is then like, yeah. And what's so wild is that I bet almost no one at those games thinks that's not right. What message is this sending to our kids? Like, we shouldn't indoctrinate children. So I wanted to know who was critiquing this. So what I did is I started looking up, does any military people critique the injections of militarism into sports? But I'm curious, before I get into my example, if you have any other thoughts on, this specifically the function line, or I'm peeling into your sense of fair play. What do you got there?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of things, Greg. I think a quote from Eisenhower comes to mind. Dwight Eisenhower reportedly said that the true mission of American sports is to prepare young people for war.
What?
And George Orwell,
oh my God,
on top of that, he called sports war minus the shooting. So
wow.
Does it have to be though? Like, does it have to be those things? Like, why has the far right been so successful in seizing essentially a culture war monopoly on the messaging and the branding of sports? So I have to put all this in the context of American history and culture. And I admit that that's problematic because this is a deeply Canadian song. But I just have to think about it in my own setting and timeline. And it's just kind of unusual that our national anthem, which was based on a poem by a lawyer and slave owner on board a British ship negotiating prisoner releases during the battle, the War of 1800, and the shelling of Fort McHenry in Baltimore, Maryland. So Francis Scott Key writes this poem, which later becomes the national anthem, and it's set to the music of a British drinking song. Like, how hilarious is this? And with debates over what the meaning is of the forgotten verses of the poem that are left out of the national anthem.
Yeah.
Like nothing can save the hireling or the slave. Like, is this a reference to the Americans referring to themselves as being enslaved by the British, like the colonists had done so during the Revolutionary America? Is this a specific reference to the enslaved people who abandoned plantations and joined the British to fight against the American forces since they were promised their freedom? So scholars kind of debate on that, but the fact that it has that baggage in the first place is problematic. So from what I could tell, the first use of the national anthem in baseball was in 1918 at the World Series between the Cubs and the Red Sox. So this is during World War I, and it caught on later on in Boston as a result, though the national anthem doesn't even officially become official until 1931. Later on in the 50s, like the Baltimore Orioles even stopped playing it before games during the seventh inning stretch because so few people stood and so few people stopped talking. So think back to the 90s, Greg, like Whitney Houston in a red, white, and blue tracksuit belting out the national anthem with fighter jets flying overhead, set against the backdrop of the Persian Gulf. That all seems tame compared to the spectacle, the militaristic spectacle of sports since 9/11. You mentioned Humvees, the National Guard, fighter jets, veterans, even at youth games. I mean, we stop and we have the national anthem and we acknowledge service members, even at my school during games. Camo hats and jerseys, merchandise for people to buy and wear with the green and black flag on, like duffel bags and hoodies. And of course, Trump waded directly into this culture war because it was the only thing he was good at, having uninformed and unnuanced binary opinions on moral issues that middle-aged people on social media love to waste immeasurable amounts of time and energy just arguing about. So he said, if a player wants the privilege of making millions of dollars in the NFL or other leagues, he or she should not be allowed to disrespect our great American flag or country and should stand for the national anthem. If not, you're fired. Find something else to do. Sports fans should never condone players that do not stand proud for their national anthem or their country. Courageous patriots have fought and died for our great American flag. We must honor and respect it. Make America great again. And all of this is to say,
so boring.
Oh my gosh. But how compelling it is. And how to so many people that it just makes this makes sense, as if these things occur and exist in a vacuum. Like the United States Department of Defense paid the NFL more than $5 million in taxpayer funds in just 3 years to honor soldiers and veterans at games. So those hometown hero ads and those commemorations were not spontaneous, good-natured thank yous. They're paid advertisements in a part of a veiled attempt to recruit people into the military.
Yeah, we're the product, right? Like
Yeah.
we are the target of a targeted advertising campaign to suck us in.
That we're paying for.
Sick joke. It's a sick joke. Like, I found an article too. So I mentioned earlier that I was like seeing like who in the military is critiquing this, right? Like what soldiers are speaking out on this. And I found an article from 2018 that everybody should read. It's called Veterans Speak Out Against the Militarization of Sports. The main image in the article is a San Diego Padres batter wearing a camouflage jersey on a Sunday home game. What an incredible article, full of resources to talk about. So check this out. The article features an interview with somebody named Bill Astor, who is a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. He talks about the allure of when this happens. He says, I think at first there's a sort of thrilling feeling, Astor says. Unlike all the other fans, a big plane goes overhead. Wow, that's kind of awe-inspiring. But at the same time, to me, it's not something that I see should be flying over a sports stadium before a baseball game or a football game. These are weapons of death. They may be required, but they certainly shouldn't be celebrated or applauded. So that's an Air Force retired lieutenant colonel. So like when he openly discusses these as weapons of death, it really hits hard, man. Astor says he sees the perpetual selling of war and something very cynical. Patriotism for sale with troops as bait. And I was like, man, that is so well said. And it's just so disrespectful to a lot of people who don't maybe want to be used in that way, right? You're just being used. If you're like in the military and like they're doing this at games, like you're like being used, And there's an example that I found, a guy named Nick Francona, who is the son of the legendary Boston Red Sox manager, Terry Francona. So Nick is Terry's son. He enlisted in the Marines. He got out of the military. He got to work in baseball, and he was in charge of overseeing a lot of veteran stuff within Major League Baseball. And he started critiquing the system where like they would charge $40 for like camo hats. And he'd be like, where does the money go? And he like wouldn't go along with like the internal corporate capitalist darkness and the cynicism of how patriotism is used as like a level to sell merchandise. And he got fired. So an actual Marine, the son of a Boston Red Sox manager, is in baseball doing veterans affairs and veterans outreach stuff, was critiquing the way that it is cynically used to it, like using soldiers as like products to sell us a product based with our tax dollars. He critiqued that system, an actual Marine, mind you, and he got fired because he wouldn't play the totally cynical game of just making and selling like $40 hats.
And just think then, what position do we have to critique those things? We can't openly.
I know.
We have to do it on a podcast that we know nobody's going to listen to.
I know. We're screaming into the void here, people. So like in that article, man, it gets dark, so dark. I found out about the contracts between pro sports teams and the Pentagon, which blew me away, which you just alluded to. And John McCain and Jeff Flake, the two former senators of Arizona, released a report in 2015 called Tackling Paid Patriotism, where they critiqued the military contracts with pro sports franchises of every kind. Jeff Flake and John McCain's report found that in 2012, the New York Army National Guard paid the Buffalo Bills $250,000 to conduct on-field re-enlistment ceremonies. In 2014, the Georgia National Guard paid the Atlanta Falcons $114,000 to sing the national anthem. In 2015, the Air Force paid NASCAR $1.5 million in part for veterans to shake hands with racing legend Richard Petty. These are your tax dollars at work, people out there. People talk about, can't afford taking care of people's cancer treatments, but we got all this money for like literal on-field photo ops that mean nothing, and all it is a cynical ploy for attention. And it's absolutely mind-blowing the amount of waste and financial, like just total flushing money down the toilet that goes into these sporting events that could actually be doing good in I don't know, building a road, repaving Main Street in freaking Buffalo, New York, for God's sakes. Anything, literally anything.
You know, another article that I recommend, since you mentioned this one, Greg, is called From Winnipeg to Tokyo and the Surveillance State. And it's from the Canadian Dimension. You'll find it online if you Google that. And it details the collusion between organized sports, the military, and specifically local law enforcement to strengthen private security firms, continue over policing city centers over where they're already over policed, and this disproportionately impacts at-risk communities. They enable gentrification. They support facial recognition technology and race-based hiring practices, land privatization, displacing and outbidding affordable housing, raising police budgets. In Winnipeg alone in 2018, during the Jets playoff run, police handed out almost $800,000 in overtime pay. There are new police tactics that were piloted in sports arenas following 9/11, and police have cross-referenced racist predictive crime algorithms with sports schedules. The Department of Homeland Security has provided guidelines for informing on coworkers at sports arenas. The Atlanta has used disinfecting drones where the Falcons play. So it's like, if you want to know about what's next in policing, what technology and tactics are about to be used in our communities and are in our streets, just pay attention to sports. So to me, it's wild when people say, like, leave politics out of sports, as if anything is political. I mean, plus just ask those people then who say that, why Jackie Robinson is famous again, or why only last year Major League Baseball recognized the stats from the Negro Leagues, or why Kyrie Irving was mocked for burning sage before a Celtics game, like why Tommy Smith and John Carlos were suspended from the U.S. Olympic teams for the Black Power salute. If if people are thinking that these things exist in a vacuum and that sports should be completely political, then explain those things. Like, so people who say that sports are apolitical, right? But listen to this from a spokesperson from the Jets. It says, as with all of our sponsors, we have worked with the National Guard to create tailored advertising and marketing programs to meet their specific objectives, which in this case was recruitment and retention by targeting our fans and audience through media and stadium assets controlled by the team.
You know, and knowing all of this, I feel leads into the next line, right? Because now, knowing all of these things, knowing the way that his beloved game, where, you know, people would play on outdoor ponds, frozen ponds, just literally for fun and exercise, and to have a great memory with kids. Chris says this: Dear Ron McLean, I wouldn't bother with these questions if I didn't sense some spiritual connection. We may not be the same, but it's not like we're from different planets. We both love this game so much we can hardly fucking stand it. And I love the notion of hockey as spiritual, because I feel that way when I'm running or when I'm riding my bicycle. Like, people know I'm a big cyclist, I'm a big runner. And whenever I am in the zone of total focus on a bicycle in the middle of the countryside with no cars around, no people around, it's just me and the wind in my ears and on my face, there's something that transcends just exercise in those moments, where you feel so a part of something beautiful, something efficient, something lovely, something that is just totally human. And that's what I feel like Chris is seeing here, is like, you're injecting death and war and violence into something so beautiful, where humans can like literally be in a room together, like, and hug each other, but then we turn it into a violent exposition. And so this is the internal dilemma, right? These two guys, Chris, who was in this interview in 2009 discussing his disinterest in hockey in the 90s. Chris said, I didn't care at all. I didn't watch hockey in the 90s, essentially. After Gretzky left Canada, my interest took a nosedive for the majority of the 90s. It wasn't until around 99 where one day over at George's house, we started watching the playoffs. And I was like, oh, I forgot about this. Got right back into it. It was the Leafs, obviously, with a pretty sweet lineup at the time. But by then, Chris, who was the Chris who had been actively working at G7 for several years, he was writing Today's Empires, he had values, he had ideals, and then he comes back right as professional sports was about to take this insanely dark militarization turn post 9/11. And then Ron MacLean was there too, watching Cherry descend further into madness, constantly trying to redirect conversations to hockey, while Cherry just went on these rants that we heard earlier. And MacLean, the voice of reason, who got dragged down by Don Cherry. MacLean, who loves hockey so much, he's willing to be punished by his co-host relentlessly. Because someone has to be the balancing force on that show, right? I bet you this probably kept Ron MacLean up at night a lot of years if my assessment of him is even remotely accurate. He just seems like just a guy. And that's what I think Chris is appealing to here is MacLean's humanness and the fact that like MacLean felt like he was just trying to bring some balance to this, but he's also witnessing this maniac who is going in all the directions that's sucking the joy and beauty out of these beautiful human moments.
Yeah, what works so well with this song, Greg, for me as an outsider who I don't know anything in addition to this show and,
of course,
and hockey outside of what you've already shared and the lyrics here, is Chris's serious tone throughout the song. It never feels like the lyrics are a gotcha setup with unanswerable questions. I really think Chris wants to have this conversation with Ron MacLean. He wants these things addressed, confronted, and challenged. I don't hear the band backing Ron into a corner, kind of like Humane Meat does.
Yeah.
Targeted lyrics. I hear this song as sitting down with someone, maybe over a beer, in order to find common ground. And speaking with just the few things that I know and what you've shared, Chris believes that maybe Ron isn't too far gone. And Don Cherry is clearly like a crackpot, racist, warmonger apologist, but Ron isn't yet lost.
Dude, and you know what, man? Like, I bet that there's few people in Canada who are white men over a certain age. I bet there are few people in Canada that haven't examined themselves more in the last couple of years than Ron MacLean. If you listen to that statement at the beginning of the episode that we did earlier of Ron MacLean's reflections upon, I should have done this, I should have done that. I bet an interview with Chris and Ron MacLean would be such an interesting conversation where you put these two guys in a room together with some microphones. I bet that would be just an amazing conversation. So Ron MacLean, if you ever hear this, hit up Chris Hanna for a chat. Because I feel like the conversation could be tremendously beautiful, So we've got this next line. Alberta-born, prairie-raised, seems there ain't a sheet of ice north of Fargo I ain't played. From Penhold to the Gatineau, every fond memory of childhood that I know is somehow connected to the culture of this game. I just can't let it go. And I talked to Sheldon a lot about the importance of place when you're a young hockey player in Canada. I was like, why does Chris list all these places? And that's what I wanted to know from Sheldon. So we already talked about that a lot. So I'm curious about your assessment of this line before I talk about some things that Chris said.
Well, I think back to my possibly disastrous tweet prompt asking people for their spiciest propaganda takes, which I regretted.
You always get us in trouble.
That's my gosh. I regretted maybe 2 hours after hitting send tweet. But, so Trevor Jacobs, a Propagandhi fan and a hockey writer, responded by saying, American fans will never be on the level as Canadian fans, simply because of all of the Canadian and hockey references. And I really think that's an excellent point. And I'm only really starting to realize how true it is. And this example, this lyric is a perfect example of that. maybe there is some like stand-in for me, some places in my youth that I visited, but it's not the same. It's not those places, and it wasn't playing hockey. So I think all these things that are mentioned here that I don't know anything about. And Trevor went on to say that to Propagandhi and to many Canadians, hockey is more than sport. You mentioned spiritual, and he said it's our shared heritage and culture. So for these people of different backgrounds to find this, this common ground and this uniting interest here that to me, I don't have a connection to. Um, I see American sports so wrapped up in consumerism and proxy identity
Mm-hmm.
that stand in for real culture. Like I don't really believe that, but I think it sometimes. And my point is that it's hard for me to see sports as legitimate culture, a place of belonging, a shared identity that transcends state or province, something that actually unites people, because so much of it is toxic and commercial and poisoned in the US. So because I can't process that, I really think Trevor's right. I hear how personal the song is, but I don't actually get why.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I wanted to know so much about the hockey nature of Canada with Sheldon, who was so thoughtful and so descriptive on that during that interview. So shout out again to Sheldon. And like, I found that interview that I mentioned earlier with Chris Hanna from the Silver 7 website, and he addresses the nature of this section in the song. The interviewer asks, "Do you have any good hockey memories from playing when growing up?" And Chris replies, "Oh yeah, all of them. Every memory is a pretty good one. Driving down the back roads of Manitoba when it was so snowy, you'd have a convoy of cars going about this fast." Chris makes a slow gesture with his hand. That haunting snow just snaking across. I love that. Oh, my first goal in Poplar Point, Manitoba. Love that. So Chris has got these really vivid memories. And this really stood out to me as well, because unless you've experienced driving a back 2-lane Canadian highway in the middle of the night in the wintertime where there is snow blowing across the road, but it's not snow that's going to make your tires slide out. It's just blowing snow across a road. And I've driven across Saskatchewan in December, January, February in the dark with snow blowing across the highway, and it's so enchanting to see that. And so to see that Chris mentions the haunting snow snaking across, like I have those memories as well. And from my time living in the plains in Canada. And this got me thinking about this lyric as well. And if I was going to rewrite this lyric, it would be about seeing live music. So here's mine. St. Louis born, Missouri raised, seems like there ain't a concert venue floor I ain't raged. From Chicago over to KC Mo, every fond memory of childhood that I know is somehow connected to this culture of this music. I just can't let it go.
Yeah.
So I rewrote this verse because it just was so cool to me. But, I think if we move on to the next lyric, is that okay?
Yeah, I'll read it here. It says, "But I guess it comes down to what kind of world you want to live in. And if diversity is disagreement and disagreement is treason, well, don't be surprised if we find ourselves reaping a strange and bitter fruit that saddle man beside you keeps feeding to your minds as virtue." And I love the phrasing behind what kind of world you want to live in, like that whole part there.
If diversity is disagreement.
Like, again, if it feels kind of hopeful. And I'm not gonna lie, I hear this, and even this album coming out in 2009, I like my stand-in now for it is Trump, even though I know that the sad old man is Don Cherry,
Yeah,
or it's the other sad old men in our lives. Like I think about how much those people have like personified these harmful and toxic traits of nationalism and masculinity and xenophobia. And am I doing enough to push back against those people's, against their vitriol? Or if I'm just biting my tongue and giving the thumbs up to try to get through the broadcast like Ron McLean. And I think this song just does a great job highlighting the power, the influence, and the reach of bitter, mediocre, maladjusted people who, based on the litany of unintelligible races, but also kind of good old boy quotes that we've heard, that just seems to be the shtick, that they continue to be in those positions of reach or power or authority.
Yeah. And I like the multiple references here, and you have to kind of be Canadian to see all the angles of this. And the only reason I sort of picked up on this is because I lived in Canada for so long, but there's the reference to Abel Meerschael's Bitter Fruit, which was later popularized by Billie Holiday as Strange Fruit regarding the lynchings of Black Americans. So we have that, but we also have Bitter Fruit can possibly be a play on the nickname of Don Cherry, whose nickname is Grapes and whose last name is Cherry. So you have the bitter fruit reference, meaning like sour grapes, right? So it can be like this sour grapes reference to John Cherry's Grapes nickname, and can also be rotting cherries. You know what I mean? So there's this reference to fruit here, which has this double entendre of referring directly to Cherry as, with his multiple fruit names. And then you have Abel Meerschael's Bitter Fruit poem and Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. So it's really, really well done. Don Cherry is a climate change denying, crazy outfit wearing, occasionally misogynistic, pretty racist, but for a long time people considered him like a national treasure, which is pretty sad whenever you idealize the people who are the Trumps of the world, who are just so boring in their worldviews and just like, oh my God, this is just so small. It's so pathetic and small. And, so then I think about this next line, which is so interesting. It takes a village to raise a child, but just a flag to raise, RAZE, the children, until there's nothing more than ballast for fulfilling a madman's dreams of a paradise where complexity is reduced to black and white. So this village, it's kind of a reference to, it might be a reference to It Takes a Village and Other Lessons Children Teach Us, which is a book published in 1996 by Hillary Clinton, who was First Lady of the U.S. at the time. She presented a vision for the children of America in that book, and it focuses on the impact individuals and groups outside the family have, for better or worse, on a child's well-being and advocates of society, which meets all of a child's needs. So that's a book that came out in the 90s. But this line also makes me think of how our society has grown from being small groups of a few hundred people working in collaboration for the betterment of all within a small community, into these megalith behemoth cities and sprawling metropolitan concrete jungles where nobody knows anyone, and you're surrounded by millions of people, but you never feel more alone than when you're with millions of people who you don't know. I know almost nobody in Buffalo. Almost nobody cares that I'm a human being in this city. And it makes me want to get in my car and drive 100 miles an hour out of town in search of someone who cares that I even exist. But then what this patriotism exercises do in these sports games is they tug on the heartstrings of tens of thousands of people who are possibly very lonely, right? Like me, when they're inside sports games. And I've been to a freaking Sabres game alone before, and you feel lonely in a crowd, and it sucks you in when that national anthem plays and you're like, oh my God, I'm alone, but here we are united, blah, blah, blah. And it makes you feel that sensation of unity with those people who you don't know. And then you inject commentary like that of Don Cherry, and suddenly you're talking smack about immigrants whose lives you cannot know. You're making snap judgments about religion because of what religion you perceive those immigrants to be. You make snap judgments about race because of what race you perceive those immigrants to be. And then you are down the rabbit hole that easily on full-on white nationalism and full-on patriotic jingoism that divides far more than it unites. It's such a slippery slope.
Yeah, I think with Chris here as an uncle, not yet as a parent, addressing how all of these things collectively inform, shape, and raise children. Video games like last week, or military messaging that we're discussing now, and this dogmatic and fanatical military worship in school, at hockey rinks and baseball diamonds and football fields. The Don Cherries of the world don't want kids to think for themselves, that questioning the ubiquitous nature of military and the flexing of that power is not a good thing to those people. And it's unreal how many Propagandhi songs are not just still relevant, but even more so, addressing topics that have now been beaten into the ground, but uncritically, I think, by media outlets. I just think that the fact that Mike Pence flew to Indiana just so he could leave a game knowing that members of the 49ers would kneel during the national anthem. So, I mean, why do
I forgot about that. Jeez.
Like, why do I stand during the national anthem? If I'm at a game, it's because if I don't, someone's going to yell at me.
Yep.
Like, I don't want to stand. I thought it was cool when Joey Belladonna from Anthrax sang the national anthem before a Cubs game. Like, that's kind of cool. I like Marvin Gaye's version, but I don't want to have to stand for it every time just because this is now the expectation. And it reminds me of possibly the worst political cartoon I've ever seen, Greg. And I've seen it even used by teachers in the classroom in incredibly harmful ways. So the cartoon is a classroom of these like stoic middle school students, hands over their hearts, like chins raised, facing the flag during the Pledge of Allegiance, with one student who is like the prototypical 90s slacker, arms crossed, leaned back, his feet are on the desk, which would just never happen. And the teacher says, "Kevin, it's your right not to stand. But let me introduce you to someone who can't stand because he was defending that right." And next to the teacher is a Marine in full uniform in a wheelchair. That's the worst political cartoon ever. The message is so harmful that your rights don't matter as much as pleasing people, as fitting in, as not offending others. That doing this for that person and shaming children is more important than what their rights actually are. That wounded, injured, and killed soldiers can and should be used as props to prove a point in a culture war, in a moral argument. It's no longer a constitutional argument, because you can do that, sure, but should you? It's an absurd catch-22 that perfectly sums up America. Like, hey, I defended your rights, so don't use them.
Especially when the injury was likely sustained in a conflict like the takedown of Iraq in 2003, which that country stood zero threat to us in any way. Yeah. So there was no defending the borders of the United States going on in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, unless you were in World War II or the Civil War, you really weren't fighting for American freedom or liberty. But you can't say that. I can't say that to my coworkers. I can't say that to my parents. I can't say that to my brother who is in the service. I can't say those things, because then you're going to be pegged as being un-American and anti-military. And so the federal government is threatening the freedom of Americans by restricting voting access, right? The federal government is not like our created and fabricated foreign enemies overseas. State governments are violating rights by passing anti-trans legislation. Far-right extremists are threatening freedoms by carrying out acts of violence and trying to overturn elections. Those are the threats and the freedoms the threats to American freedoms that we face today. So I'm going to read one more thing from Salon. It says, "No American freedom is currently at stake in Afghanistan. It is impossible to imagine an argument to the contrary, just as the war in Iraq was clearly fought for the interests of empire, the profits of defense contractors, and the edification of neoconservative theorists. It had nothing to do with the safety or freedom of the American people. The last time the U.S. military deployed to fight for the protection of American life was in World War II. an inconvenient fact that reduces cliches about thanking a soldier for free speech to rubble. If a soldier deserves gratitude, so does the litigator who argued key First Amendment cases in the court, the legislators who voted for the protection of free speech, and the thousands of external agitators who rallied for more speech rights, less censorship, and broader access to media.
Yeah. And, I don't want people in the military to die in acts of war that the Pentagon and the executive branch and the legislative branch sends them into. Like that person who was used in that political cartoon, those things should not have happened to that person. That just shouldn't have happened. They were used in a profit-driven scheme that, it's crazy. But like this Madman's Dreams of a Paradise line looks a lot different today after half a decade of Trump in our ears.
Right.
And you know what I got to thinking? I was like, dude, I'm really glad that Don Cherry never used his celebrity to run for a political office in Canada, because I bet that Don Cherry could have become the Prime Minister of Canada. Like if Trump can become the president of the United States, I bet that Don Cherry could have become a party leader in Canada. And so I'm like, whoa, Canada dodged a bullet that Don Cherry stayed on television and never got into politics, because like that is a dire situation. But then this closing line, man, how do I protect her from this cult of death? Can't do it. You and I are teachers, and I've had students in the past. After Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, several of my seniors said to me, this is a direct quote, "We're surprised it hasn't happened here yet." My seniors told me after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas mass shooting in Florida, "I can't believe it hasn't happened here yet."
That's their wallpaper now.
They go to school every day expecting a shooting to occur. And the fact that it didn't during their schooling years actually surprised them. They're surprised that they didn't have to run from gunfire in a school. That is the mindset of young people in the United States today. So when it says, how do I protect her from this cult of death? We talked about all the ways that the military funds these outreach efforts through sports. We talked about the way they fund outreach efforts through games. We talk about how so many mass shootings in the United States are met with quote unquote thoughts and prayers, which is a great Good Riddance record, by the way, about the mass shootings that have plagued this country for decades at this point. How do I protect her from this cult of death? Can't be done. I do not believe that you can raise a child in this country today protecting them from the cult of death. It is ever present. And, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So, Keith, do you have any YouTube comments?
I just found one, Greg, that stood out. It says, "I've had this song in my head for about 5 straight hockey games now."
Nice. I found a couple. I believe that Chris Hanna is the most underestimated musician in Canada, which I loved. Another one says, "Couldn't agree more. All these military salutes and pageants and pregame shows make me groan inside. Hockey is just a commodified Canadian institution nowadays." So, some people are paying attention. I wish everybody was. But, I have a teachable moment here to kind of take us out. This is all a series of moments that have ratcheted up the intensity of our society over the last 20 years since 9/11. We pit American against American, Canadian against Canadian in a thing, sports, that should be such a happy-go-lucky, unified, fun atmosphere where people can be people together. Instead, if you go to a game now and you don't stand, you're going to get yelled at, like you said. I have felt that feeling many times. And now what I conveniently do if I go to a hockey game or a baseball game is I stand outside where the vending is. And like I stand in like the beer line when I know that the anthem and stuff is going to happen. And so I usually am able to bypass that strategically because I know when it's going to happen. But one of the things that catches me out every single time is when they randomly drop the military soldier appreciation moment in the middle of a game. And here tonight in attendance, we have so-and-so. And then it's like, and then comes the group rite of submission, right? They spring it on you when you're in your seat, comfortable, watching a game, having a good time, and bam, they just chuck it at you out of nowhere. So that's something that bums me out. But can you imagine how many unreported instances of harassment have occurred in stadiums of people getting into arguments in the stands at a sporting event in any given stadium, from little leagues to minor league to NBA to MLB to NHL to NFL, where someone yells, "Hey, stand up," at someone who doesn't automatically rise to their feet like an unthinking automaton? This isn't just a top tier pro sports problem. This goes on at every level. And I can't even imagine how many dads have yelled at people at Little League games or something like that if they see people in a crowd who didn't stand up for something. Like, this is like us subjecting ourselves to being harassed in a country that allegedly values freedom overall, but really isn't all that free. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of as we conclude this episode.
Yeah, Greg, I have to say that I think that everything has a history, right? The food that we eat, the cars that we drive, the games we play, and the things taking place during those games. And we should never take those variety of things as at face value.
Yeah.
We should not settle by allowing whatever surrounds us to just become normal. Unusual and disturbing images with consequential implications that eventually just become routine. They become tradition and ceremony that you don't question, and you say that's just the way it is. And I think we have a chance to dismantle the harmful elements from the things that we love. So maybe our kids will grow up in a world where unrestrained displays of imperial might aren't the backdrop to the happiest moments of our lives, but we're not going to be able to do that if we don't have open and fair conversations about it.
Yeah. Do you want me to rank this?
Yeah. What do you got?
I got a 5, baby. It's a 5 out of 5. One of the best songs of all freaking time. How can you beat this?
Yeah.
How can you beat this?
Yeah.
It's surreal. And like, all you got to know for the reason this is a 5 is you and I were talking off air earlier about a performance at Fest in like 2015, where the camera is close up on Chris, and then all of a sudden the lyrics come in. Chris sings "Dear Ron McClain" into the microphone, and you can't even hear him sing because the crowd is so loud, right? This is like one of those moments, man. Like this, I'm like getting goosebumps, like thinking about seeing this song live right now. And God, it's just one of the best songs ever. And I know that every Propagandhi fan out there just thinks this song is just one of the greatest.
It feels hard to be able to dismantle like the power and the legislation and the contracts and the wealth that is now like binding the federal government, the Department of Defense, the military with these institutions of entertainment and athleticism. But hearing the fans and people in the crowd sing along at least makes you feel a little bit like there are other people who are on board and aren't happy with the route that we've taken. But you know, for me to even not know much about anything about hockey or sports in general, I still love the song. It resonates in other ways, since unfortunately, you know, the NFL has even more money. It has even more flag toting. In the U.S., they're more, you know, war-loving drones, automatons, like you said, banging the drums of war while chowing down on pregame snacks. I mean, it almost feels even more of an issue in the United States. So yeah, I think this is an incredible song. I'm giving it a 5 as well, Greg.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to this insanely in-depth and very, very action-packed episode 50. Thank you again to our guests, Sheldon Birnie, Scott Radinsky, Emilie Plamondon, and Karl Bullets. You all are awesome, and we're grateful for your collaboration. Oh, and Tim MacMiller. Holy smokes. Did I say Tim? I'm saying Tim twice if I missed him. And you can find us on social media, on Instagram and Twitter at PropagandhiPod. You can email us at propagandhipod@gmail.com. And we're just thrilled to reach this episode 50 milestone. Thank you again to everybody out there. If you listen all the way through to the end of these behemoth episodes, you're just a champion, and I want to hang out with you and have a beer someday. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
I'll just wave my hand like this. Like this is usually my, hey, I have an idea. I'll wave my hand if I'm going to sneeze.
I don't give a shit if you sneeze. Fucking sneeze. Who cares?
Well, just to warn you so it doesn't, I don't know.
This is all going on the blooper reel, by the way. Go for it.